Good morning, everybody. I'm late. This is true. I am running late. We're going to catch up. Don't worry. Those of you who are here and not sure what's happening, those of you who are wondering exactly what the nature of this hearing is. So, Republican Party from Dekalb County filed for a writ of mandamus, which is a writ asking for action from the court in order to help protect their election, the 2024 election. I'm going to be catching up. I know I'm a little bit behind. I apologize for that. I'm running. As you can imagine, I didn't post this stream till 5:30 in the morning, so I'm running on just a little bit of sleep here. But I am going to catch up. I'm going to keep you informed as to exactly what's happening and how things are progressing in this case. And we're going to monitor to see exactly what the court finds that Brad Raffensperger, Secretary of State for the state of Georgia, has to do to remedy shortcomings that they have there. I'm expecting there to be testimony that's going to be coming in here. I have no idea how long this hearing is going to take. I think it's going to probably be a few days. And I apologize for my lateness, but I'm going to make up. I'm going to make up in quality what I'm lacking so far in quantity. That's the goal here. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on in to the stream here. I've got it pulled up here. We're going to be starting like 45 minutes behind, but we'll catch up. I don't think it'll be that hard to catch up on all of this. So let me pull that up for you. All right, let's go.
Ask and inquire, Mr. McDougald. I think your initial time estimate was 4 to 5 witnesses, about 4 to 5 hours, including cross and that sort of thing. Is that still your anticipation?
It's going to be a little bit longer than that. I've got a category of witnesses that I'm calling authentication witnesses. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And McDougald is counsel for one of Trump's co-defendants.
7. They'll be
Fani
very
Willis
short,
case.
each one of those. 3 of them by Zoom. 1 is elderly and 2 are in hurricane-stricken areas. And then
he was at the
after
Fani
those
Willis hearing.
witnesses are finished, we will have 2 experts to testify. And I had guessed earlier that they would be 2 hours apiece, direct and cross. They might go
sounded like 2 days of testing.
a little bit more than that, but we'll just have to see.
That's
all right, and those are the two expert witnesses, as you put it, I would assume are the heart of your case. Those are the ones you said that are here and you're hoping to have heard today.
Correct. It's Mr. Parikh and Mr. Cotton, and they're both from out of town.
All right. You'd mentioned conferring with opposing counsel about whether there was a need for these authenticating witnesses. Anything have come from those?
We haven't discussed that.
All right.
I was just explaining what my plan was to them, but I don't think they have said what their position on that is one way or the other. And what we're trying to authenticate are the backup election databases from these 4 counties. And we have 2 approaches to that, Your Honor. These items were produced to volunteers who made requests to the counties. That's 4 of the witnesses. They will say they got the flash drive, sent it up the chain, a couple of hops, it makes it to a website, which was provided to them, to Ms. McGowan, actually in March. Our experts downloaded the information from that site. There are hash files associated with these productions. That's an alternate or additional method of authentication, and the experts can talk about that. But they haven't had a chance to think about that or review that, so I don't know that it's fair to ask them.
Right. No, I wouldn't. I won't put them on the spot here. But what I would ask, whenever we get an opportunity for a break here this morning, if you could provide to Ms. Young, if she doesn't already have the identity of these 7 authenticating experts, exactly what you're trying to get in through them, and then maybe you can come back and you can tell me if we actually have a need for them. I'd also propose that I don't necessarily know if we need them to be in that order. We could always start with your experts and we can prove it up later. I think under
Yeah,
104B.
That would work. That would work.
All right.
And we do have a pro hac vice application from Mr.
Pro
Olson.
vice means
It
someone
was
coming
submitted to the state bar. We don't have
in
their
for just this
response yet.
case.
I spoke to
been
Ms.
in
McGowan,
Georgia.
excuse me, Ms. Young about that just a moment ago, and she indicated they were not going to oppose the pro hac vice application of Mr.
They're usually
Olson. So
granted.
as a housekeeping matter, I wanted
If
to
the
bring
person
that
is
up.
an attorney.
Okay, let's get to that in just
Anywhere.
a minute. Let me
They'll
make sure I don't forget some other things.
Okay.
Anywhere in the
All right,
country.
so
how am I
in terms
sound
of the
levels?
authenticating experts
compared to
and
them?
using Zoom, any positions on that, Ms. Young?
That's acceptable to us.
Okay.
Move along.
All right. And then when it comes to any conflicts and logistics, I know Ms. Young has indicated she has quite an active week here in Fulton County. So we're gonna accommodate those. We're gonna work around those. My understanding was that there's a statutory imperative that we begin this in 30 days, but there's not necessarily the end date is not determined. So we'll see as we make our way through it where we can, if we need to pick up where we left off at some later date, or perhaps we see how far we get today and go from there. But if it doesn't make sense to pick it back up Wednesday, well, maybe Thursday, we'll find a different time. All right. Other than the pro hoc, was there any other thing we need to bring up before we get into the motion to dismiss on behalf of the, let me start with the behalf of the petitioner.
No, I think those are the housekeeping matters we need to do.
Okay, Ms. Young, anything on behalf of the Secretary of State?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, no conflicts today, right? We've got you today. Okay. All right. So with the pro hack, Ms. Young, looked at the application. Any position on your behalf?
We defer to the court on that, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. McDougald, what is the expected role of for Mr. Olson in this proceeding?
I will be handling the witnesses and making the arguments, but he knows a lot about the case and he's a good lawyer and he's helping me. And so I would like to have him at council table.
All right. So really the only request here is that he's at council table with you and you're
Definitely
conferring with
get
him,
that.
but otherwise you're making all the arguments, you're presenting the evidence, you're doing everything else.
Mr. Harding is going to
To
step up.
sit
to the
up
plate
there,
on
you're
the
supposed to be
motion to limit.
admitted.
Okay.
So that's, they're admitting him for this
There may
case.
come a time where it's necessary for one or the other of them to appear if
Pro
there's a
hoc.
hearing between October 10th and 23. I have some international travel scheduled, and so I don't have.
I mean, I certainly think we're going to get this done before then. It's just,
but I don't want that to delay the case, and if I have to, I'll appear by Zoom.
okay. All right. Well, understood. Well, I'll say this then, and I can reduce this to a written order if there's a request. But if essentially Mr. Olson's role is just here as an advisory capacity, sitting at council table, it'll just be a conditional approval on those grounds.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
All right.
That's usually,
With that, then let's move on to the motion to dismiss. Again, I've reviewed it. I've reviewed that in the response and anticipate taking it under advisement here this morning with the reserving the right to revisit it at any point during the evidence.
taking advisement means I'm putting it on hold for now, and that I'll probably reject it later. And this is a motion to dismiss brought by Raffensperger.
Or at the conclusion of the case. But if we want to hear some preliminary arguments, I wanted to give each side 10 to 15 minutes to go through some of those. Had a few follow-up questions. We can explore some of that. So Ms. Young, your motion.
So she knows she's walking dead. When he says, I plan on taking on advisement. It usually
Your
is a
Honor.
way of saying GFY.
With all due respect to the court's plan to take it under advisement.
Yeah, that's why she's not happy.
It's our position that the court need not even move into the evidentiary phase of
Let's
this
speed this up a little
proceeding because it is so clear from the face of the application that this does not state a valid claim for a writ of mandamus. A writ of mandamus is an extraordinary remedy and is only to be granted when there is a clear
Generally
legal
true.
right to the relief that it seeks.
Mm.
There are two statutory provisions that the petitioner claims are at issue here, and there is really no factual dispute that the secretary has complied with any legal duty that he has under either provision. The first provision required the secretary to purchase a system that was EAC certified. He did that. I don't think there's any dispute as to that. In fact, in their motion, they don't take issue with the fact that it was, in fact, a certified system by the EAC. They just say, well, that can't possibly be the end of the requirement. They seek to impose some extrajudicial or extra statutory kind of continuing certification requirement
dominant.
on the secretary. That's not the way that it works, and there's no evidence or allegation in here that that's the way that it works. EAC certification is something that is given to a system. There's no yearly review or renewal or anything like that. If the legislature had wanted to impose some kind of an ongoing obligation on the secretary or a third party to, continuously update or monitor compliance with EAC standards, the legislature knew how to do that. The second requirement that they talk about is the secretary's.
EAC are the standards that govern how their elections are run. I if I had woken up earlier, I would have gone through with you the application here. I spent a lot of time marking up this application, which is behind this hearing that we're having today. But basically, EAC is the overseeing entity here, as alleged in their complaint or in their petition for relief, that EAC is basically the governing standards and provides the governing standards for how the state's supposed to operate. And what she's arguing is we just have to hire someone who's EAC compliant under the statute. So if they remain EAC compliant, they fail to live up to EAC compliance, we don't have to worry about that, which is a retarded notion that she's arguing.
Certification of the safety of the system. Again, the secretary has done that.
Sure.
They don't take issue with that either. They just feel like the secretary should not have done, have given the certification in the way that he did. That goes to the heart of a discretionary duty, which is not an appropriate basis for a writ of mandamus. And one way of illustrating this, I think, is to look at the unusual nature of this proceeding. A writ of mandamus is given an expedited track for a reason. They should be very simple cases. Official X had a duty to do Y. And if you even need an evidentiary presentation, it should be very brief. You call a witness that says, this official didn't do this thing. And if that is correct, the court says, official X, go do that thing. That's not this proceeding. They are seeking to put on a full presentation of the same tired claims that have been rejected by courts all over the country again and again. The same claims that these plaintiffs are making have led to sanctions in other cases.
That's what she's saying.
Not just a finding of lack of merit, but sanctions against the parties and the attorneys. And if you look at the relief requested by the plaintiffs or petitioners, I'm sorry, again, it's not mandamus relief. They want this court to order this and that. They have to go change this and go get this certification here and implement this new standard there.
Yeah, I'm quickly getting angry at this bitch also.
Mandamus relief. Mandamus relief would be you didn't certify, Mr. Secretary, that the system was safe. Go certify it. But the secretary's already done that. If you look at the plain language,
the certification doesn't live up to the standards.
The instructions that were given by the General Assembly
and that's
to the
part of the
Secretary
EAC.
are clear,
it's a ridiculous.
and they've been followed, and they've been followed appropriately.
It's a ridiculously illogical argument.
Second of all, the timing of this action is particularly suspect.
He's going to reject this.
I'm at
confident.
the very latest, the petitioners knew about this in March.
It's easy for me to be confident because I know that it's still ongoing 45 minutes from now, and it wouldn't be if her claims are accepted. But
so you mentioned that because of the email. I think they push back and say, well, the actual applicant only found out in August. I don't quite remember where that is established. How? So that's a factual dispute, right? That when they found out from, I guess they're now counsel of record, this certification issue.
These are tired old claims that have been trotted all around the country.
That's not true.
If the applicant,
but how would you establish the petitioner's specific knowledge of them?
Well, the applicant had a duty to go and seek reasonable knowledge if this is something that was concerning to them, and there's not much credibility in the claim that these petitioners didn't know or couldn't have known of this claim until right before the election.
Is that an issue of fact that perhaps a motion to dismiss is not going to be the right vehicle to make that argument?
I think that given the amount of court proceedings that have been litigated over these same exact claims all over the country, I think the court could presume and infer knowledge to elections officials.
That's not the way
that the Dominion voting system has been challenged many, many times in court and many, many times.
Those challenges are
found to
different
be
from this.
safe,
This is like when they
and
say
found
60
to have not
cases.
caused
It's
any
stupid.
material errors in elections.
And that doesn't mean they're not
Finally,
causing elections in the problems in the upcoming election, though,
relief requested,
which is stupid.
is really inappropriate here. Because they can't ask for proper mandamus relief, because anything that they could ask for that would be proper has already been done. If you look at the plain language of the statutes, the secretary has done exactly what has been required. Now, what they seek to do is sort of open this other door to what really is a different kind of case. Because, one problem that they've had all over the country is getting dismissed on lack of standing. Now, mandamus has very, very liberal standing requirements here in the state of Georgia. I'm sure that's why they filed a mandamus case. But just because they got their foot in the door doesn't mean they have a proper case, and doesn't mean that this court should entertain the type of a jury trial that is not appropriate on a mandamus action. This court's focus should be limited to what is the specific statutory duty? Is it ministerial or discretionary? And is there even an allegation here that the secretary has breached a clear legal duty? There are some clear legal duties in the statute. Purchase an EAC certified system, check. And certify that the system is safe, check. Both of those things have been done. Petitioners are not going to be able to offer any evidence to the contrary, and have done everything short of stipulate to that. And because of that, we don't think that this complaint states.
Everyone says it's been said, it's already been decided. It's already been decided. No one's ever listened to it because of these standing issues and these other stupid non-merit issues. You're correct.
It's a claim for mandamus relief. And the last thing I want to say, because I know that you're about to hear a whole lot of fear mongering about things like encryption keys. The Secretary of State has done a thorough and diligent job of exercising his discretion in terms of assuring the security of the system.
Well, if that's his actual discretion, then he's corrupt.
I don't happen to understand computer systems very well. That's why I have Mr. Dyson here to help me out. But if you think about an encryption key like a hotel room key, when you check into a hotel room, you leave on Saturday, that key is coded to stop working. So the next person that checks in on Sunday can't use your key to get into the room. And that's the same situation we have here. Yes,
that's
there
a
were
question of
encryption
fact,
keys
jackass.
found that were produced through an open records request when they shouldn't have been. And when an open records request, but just sort of the same way that if I left my hotel room key on the hotel bar, that doesn't mean you can do anything.
That's a question of fact.
The secretary puts,
that's not for a motion
and the
to
counties
dismiss.
actually put the system through rigorous checks and balances. We've had risk limiting audits, logic and accuracy testing. New encryption keys are issued for each election. So those encryption keys, just like the hotel room key, aren't going to do anything for this election.
That's a question of fact. Maybe.
But the things to
hopefully
happen that they are talking about, you'd have to have not just physical access to the machine, but because they are not connected to the internet or to other precincts, you'd have to basically engage in a kind of Mission Impossible level operation that would require a whole lot of Tom Cruises to pull it off.
Or just shut down Fulton County and claim there's a water main break.
You'd have to have people with pens and USB codes and really good sleight of hand to do all of this unnoticed by all the poll watchers that are there, the election workers that are there.
Yeah, that's still too much of a concern
in these precincts. So I would ask that as you listen to what I know that they're going to talk to you about, that you keep in mind that there are more layers of safety there than just the machines.
And provide testimony about that.
All by themselves.
Your claim is
you've got a robust level of physical security that operates on top of that. So to the extent that they claim that there is a vulnerability, they can't make the claim that this vulnerability has ever been exploited or ever will be exploited.
That's ridiculous.
I say all that because I think it's important, given that I know that they're going to talk about it. That doesn't mean that this court should entertain it. This is a mandamus case. This is not any other kind of case. And this court's focus needs to be just on what the clear legal duty is. And the secretary has done his duties under the statute. Thank you.
All right. Well, Ms. Young, one last thing I wanted to ask you about was,
Sure.
Again, kind of the mandamus procedural hurdles to clear here. When you say that there's an adequate legal remedy here, have you ever seen this presented at the appellate level of a post-election challenge being a sufficient cure for things that could come up beforehand? Is having to redo an election really an adequate remedy if the first one was bungled in some way?
Well, we would start from the standpoint that there's no evidence that there will be a risk of a bungled election.
That's ridiculous.
But
That's
yes,
what
there
we're
have
here
been
to find
cases
out.
where, if there is some kind of a problem with an election, there have been times that courts have in certain precincts or certain areas have ordered things like recounts. And there is a really robust procedure before you even get to the point of an election contest, where if there is, something going wrong at a precinct with some voting machines, for the workers at that point to come in and figure out what to do to correct for it. If they need to do a hand recount because the machines went down, they can do that before you even get to that point.
Oh, shut up, bitch.
So if all of the safeguards
Yeah,
Why
involved,
in like
we
a
saw how that-
mandamus or an injunctive posture well before the election? Have we ever seen that kind of definitively stated? We won't address this here because you have an adequate remedy come election day.
that is commonly found in cases where there's no present danger.
Yeah, and that's why we had
I
January 6th,
can't
bitch.
think of one off the top of my head, but I could probably find you one at, when I sit down. But certainly, first of all, there is case law that says that you assume that public officials are going to operate in good faith. And there's no evidence to the contrary here, from the secretary on down to the poll workers that check you in when you get there to vote. We presume, in the absence of evidence to the contrary, that everybody in the system is going to act in good faith.
Well, that's a big
And the
problem.
safeguards that the
That's
system
not
has,
the EAC
both
says. Let's
in
just assume
itself
everyone's going to act in good
and,
faith. That's not the law says.
operating all around it, physically, at the polls, are sufficient safeguards for the secretary to have been able to then, and continuing to today, to certify that the system is safe and secure. The statutory requirements have been met, and there's nothing to mandate.
Believe the system because we say the system is good. So believe the system because even though we can't really tell you anything, the system is good. And you never proved the system wasn't good, because every time anyone has questioned the system, we said believe the system because we tell you it's good. This is the kind of neoconservative bitch that Raffensperger is. This is what Raffensperger is. This bitch.
Famous here. There's nothing for the court to tell the secretary, go meet your statutory duty.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Young.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Mr. McDougal.
So before taking up the motion to dismiss,
I do need to give you all a warning, given the nature of her argument and the smugness that's imbued inside of it. I can foresee that during the course of this hearing, I am going to be muttering words that are offensive to women on occasion. Well, as I'm listening to her, because the struggle is going to be real here listening to her, because I'm already getting annoyed.
I'd like to just give the court a thumbnail of what the case is about. As we see it, action for mandamus. We seek an order compelling the secretary to comply with his legal duty to field an election system that complies with the requirements for certification by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, or EAC. The statutory source of that duty is 21-2-300, which provides for EAC certification. And counsel is correct.
Barracuda.
There is an EAC certification. By the way, Your Honor, before I forget, I have an exhibit binder, which I would like to hand out. And I have one for the witness as well, but that's for the court's convenience. We have the actual certification as part of our exhibits. The certification requirements under the EAC require compliance with something called the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines. So in the context of certification, they're not actually voluntary. The system has to comply. That's not disputed. The VVSG, Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, impose cybersecurity requirements. And among those is compliance with a federal cybersecurity standard called FIPS 140-2, which is Federal Information Protection Standards 142. So the entire set of obligations imposed by the statute is certification, VVSG compliance, FIPS 142 compliance, 140-2. And our application alleges, supported by expert affidavits, that the election system in Georgia does not, in fact, comply with those standards, notwithstanding the pre-purchase certificate. And it does not comply with respect to the storage and management of encryption keys. Well, what the heck are...
Procedurally, what happened here, by the way, and what the reason you should be somewhat encouraged is they had to get mandamus approval to have this evidentiary hearing to get and the evidentiary hearing is to get a mandamus to actually stop the government from allowing a fraudulent, a potentially easily exposable to fraud election to proceed. So the fact that we got this far is something that's somewhat novel. It should give you encouragement that McAfee is not easily swayed, that don't worry, everything's okay here. Because if he wanted to go down that road, he could have done that and said, we're not having an evidentiary hearing. So, and we wouldn't even be here this morning. So So that should encourage you. But yeah, I'm not going to be blowing the horn today. I don't think.
Encryption keys.
Because I got
It's a cipher or key that's used to encrypt or decrypt information. And you may remember that the Enigma system used by the Germans in World War II, once they obtained the key, they were able to read all of the messages. They're used ubiquitously on computer systems for the transmission, processing, storage of information. When you do online banking, it relies on encryption keys. The standards require that those keys be kept safely and securely. On Georgia's election systems, they are not. The FIPS 140-2 standard requires they be kept in what's called a cryptographic module. In fact, in the election databases, they're stored in plain text, unencrypted themselves in plain text in the election database. And that's the case on all election servers and systems that have been examined by our experts, not just in Georgia, but in other jurisdictions made by the same manufacturer. We allege, and our experts say, that is grossly non-compliant with the requirements of EAC certification, which means it does not comply with the statute.
And your petition, the sole statutory provision we're concerned with is 21-2-300, right? There's
Correct.
no greater universe. That's
Correct. A2 and A3.
all right. And so I think the heart of your case is that this is an ongoing duty.
Correct.
And so, and if this is a matter of plain language of this statute, what would you point me to say that that is plain and unambiguous? And how do you account for the seemingly temporal confinement of prior to in paragraph A3?
So there's two things to say about that, Your Honor. One is that the pre-purchase certification requirement is A2. There's a second certification that's required under A3, where the secretary himself makes a certification. Excuse me, I've got them reversed. A3 is the EAC. A2 is the secretary's certification that the system is safe and practicable for use. And that means in their actual operational use in elections. It can't mean anything else. It doesn't say safe and practicable for testing. It says safe and practicable for use. The rest of the argument is to apply rules of.
To explain what they're discussing now, one of the arguments she made is once it's certified as being viable and usable, the Secretary of State Raffensperger has done his job and doesn't have to keep monitoring the system to ensure that it's actually being done properly and that's going to be executed properly thereafter. It's it's a decision he has to make one time, and then his duty is done, and there's no further investigation. He's already done that, so we're done. The judge is saying, okay, if you read the statute plainly, she seems like she's correct. So tell me what argument you believe I should be writing in a decision to say that, no, it's not just a one-time thing, but that there is a duty on the Secretary of State to continually monitor to ensure that it remains compliant with Georgia statute. So you tell me, what is it that you think is the argument for that under the statute? And that sounds like a question he's asking. So if I agree with you, I'll be able to cite to that argument.
Statutory interpretation to the EAC certification requirement. And if it is read, as the Secretary's Counsel argues, it would be a meaningless gesture, security theater, if it is only required to be compliant in the testing environment and not the operational environment. And statutes are construed so that we presume the legislature does not intend futile or useless gestures just for show. It intends that the system be secure in use, safe and practicable for use. It would be absurd to say that that he has completed his duty as the chief elections officer in Georgia
And now
to
stick his head in the sand.
oversee the purity and regularity of elections, that all he's got to do is get a certificate before it's ever used, and that when it comes to his attention, emphatically, that it is not, that he can do nothing. And the evidence will show, and we allege in our application, that the secretary was first made aware of the encryption keys vulnerability in July of 2021, when the plaintiffs in the curling litigation delivered the Haldeman report, it's called.
So you talk about that in the brief.
Yes.
This might be a tangent here, but I'm going to chase after it for a minute. I noticed that this is going to be amended. It's going to change effective January 1, 2025, the statute we're talking about.
Right.
Are any of these provisions at issue that were at the heart of your petition changing as a result? Maybe that also can be used as an indicator of statutory intent.
To be honest with you, I haven't looked at that, and I don't know the answer.
We can cure that.
Yeah. I apologize.
What I want to ask about your your gross latches argument.
Sure.
I'm wondering, you cite Justice Lumpkin from 1848. I'm
Yes.
wondering if we've had any other maybe cases addressing latches since then
Yes,
that talk
yes.
about more of his, I guess there's a decade delay. Have we seen others applied in the context of months or kind of case specific?
Well, nothing in this factual context that I was able to find.
Maybe not so much the election context, but
Yeah.
just something that was a little more time sensitive.
Right. So there's a case that we cited in the brief called Marsh versus, I can't remember who the defendant in the Marsh case was.
I mean, that one I think just kind of clarified what the standard was. It didn't
Right.
really, as I recall, say a time frame is appropriate.
Right,
there.
right. There is a case cited in Marsh. I think it's in our brief. The plaintiff sued the Commissioner of Roads and Revenues for DeKalb County. The plaintiff was the lessee on a lease for an airport. The commissioner was required by statute to record the lease. Did not do it. And didn't do it for 16 years. And then the plaintiff, who did not know that it had not been recorded and was entitled to rely on the presumption that the public officer performs their duty properly, brought the mandamus after 16 years.
So that
You're mistaken. This is him. He's trying to flesh out by making him make the argument. He's asking him to basically make his case to that basically present what the petitioners want him to write in his decision here. There's nothing wrong with him doing that. This is the way judges do it. This is standard operating procedure. Don't worry. He proved during the Fani hearing that he's actually fairly intelligent and he sees through crap.
that case seems to hinge more on the knowledge aspect that
Correct.
I understand and I got into. I'm wondering more if you found any that kind of set a floor or a ceiling on you'd have knowledge and here's how long you waited. Have you found anything like that?
No, not a definitive parameters on that. And I've been, rolling this around in my head. What's the difference between gross negligence and regular negligence, and latches and gross latches? And I think it boils down to more adjectives about how bad it is.
Sure.
But doesn't really illuminate a clear parameter.
And what happened in August that
Okay, so
you claim that?
our client, the DeKalb County Republican Party, the chair, Marcy McCarthy, is here and she can testify about this. And this is not in the complaint, and there's nothing in the allegations.
Latches is a legal term. It's a reference to delay. It's spelled like the word latches, but with no T in it. And it's a reference to if you delay too long, you're screwed and you can't bring your claim anymore.
That would support.
I'm still trying to figure out in what context they're using that here, other than saying maybe they waited too long to bring this claim.
The finding of latches on the part of the DeKalb County GOP. But the testimony will be that she learned about the encryption keys issue in July of this year. And this case was filed in August. Now, you can say, well, the Haldeman report was made public in July of 2023. But, what does that prove? The Haldeman report, that's not that long ago. And the Haldeman report does not speak of certification requirements. It only speaks of the encryption key vulnerability itself and describes it as a very alarming and serious cyber vulnerability. Now, that's a very long report, but it's in there, and it's in two places, section 6.1 and section 9. So it was on the table. It's been on the table with the secretary for ever since then, but they haven't done anything. In March of this year,
Kind of putting that knowledge requirement on the secretary, but isn't
Yeah.
latches is understood.
Right,
Sole focus
yeah.
is on the cab.
right. So there's not going to be any evidence that the DeKalb County GOP has slept on its rights. And what Mr. Olson knew and when he knew it is a different thing. Before he is engaged to represent, his knowledge is not attributable to the plaintiff. Now, the argument was made, these are tired old claims. They've been adjudicated, been found without merit. There's been no adjudication on the merits anywhere in the United States on the encryption keys issue, nor the certification issue
There
as
you
it
go.
relates to the encryption keys. And the Exhibit 5 to the application is email correspondence between Mr. Olson and Ms. McGowan, where he brings it to her attention, gives her an affidavit from Mr. Parikh. That was in March of this year, offered to help the secretary address the problem. No response. So there's not going to be any evidence of latches, nor any evidence of gross latches. And it's a factual question anyway, as you alluded to during counsel's argument.
All right. Last question I have for you. Just kind of getting back towards the
Yeah.
kind of traditional and
Yeah.
tools we use to glean meaning from statutes if there is ambiguity or even just to confirm what we think the plain language says. we'll see if maybe the revisions have any effect on that. But are there other similar provisions, or is there anything else somewhere elsewhere in the code that you think is going to also shed light on this particular provision? Or are we just solely within the sections of 300?
The only other code section that I would invoke is the code section on statutory interpretation about what is the evil to be corrected, seek always to fulfill the legislative purpose. And it would attribute to the legislature a futile gesture to merely require, and there's one other point I'd like to bring up on this continuing obligation point. The VVSG itself, which is incorporated into the statutory requirement, imposes a continuing compliance obligation.
Sure. I think you laid that out in your petition. But when you talk about the reference to legislative purpose, which is kind of just another way of saying intent, is there a preamble or some other thing related to this code section that we should know about, or is that purpose solely to be gleaned from that one code section?
And he's basically saying, give me whatever you can that I can hang my hat on when he's saying this.
Robert Bork said that when you're searching the legislative history for legislative intent, the judge is the one that packs the bag himself. So it's a little bit hazardous to stray beyond the text. But when this system was being considered by the legislature, and before it was being considered by the legislature, there was a commission created by the Secretary of State to examine the different vendors' systems and evaluate them for cybersecurity. So anytime
why go through all this if you're just going to forget about it afterwards?
Top of mind concern, and so we can infer that the legislature required EA certification in order to meet the public need of having a secure election system. And the contract with Dominion requires continuous compliance with cybersecurity standards.
The requirement for the Secretary of State to enter a contract, that's not a requirement of statute.
No, but it's it uses the 21-2-300A3 speaks of pre-purchase. So there's going to be a contract purchase. And the EAC certification is a term and condition.
I would say here that the fact that by Raffensperger put in there in the contract that the state made with Dominion, that there's a requirement for Dominion to maintain its compliance, and that throughout while it's executing operations, it's going to maintain compliance. And that's a contract now that exists between the state. Why did you bother putting that in unless you recognize that that was part of your duties and you're telling them to fulfill those duties? That's the only reason you would put it in.
That the vendor has to meet before the secretary can buy it. And the secretary did buy it, and he bargained for and obtained contractual commitments to comply with all applicable standards, including federal information protection standards.
I mean, could the EAC, just hypothetically, I'm not saying this is a good idea, could the EAC just decide tomorrow, no more ongoing compliance that we require?
No, because the testing by the EAC on their website says the systems are tested against the VVSG. The VVSG requires ongoing compliance. So they would be repudiating their own certification guidelines.
Federal
they took that position.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. McDougall.
All right. I guess you don't need to hear from me about the adequate remedy at law then.
I feel like, I think that was addressed at the briefing.
Very well.
So,
all right. Thank you very much.
There. All right. So as indicated, I'm going to reserve the ability to come back and make a ruling on these issues. And I want to give the petitioner the opportunity to present some evidence to make a record. And so I think we need to press onward here. So, and as it relates to that, on the motion to eliminate to exclude both of these experts, kind of the core of the case, I think they play right into the same kind of arguments in terms of the relevance, the 403 objections. Certainly, if the motion to dismiss arguments on the statutory intent are accepted, I think those would be on point. But since I'm deferring those, I think those would also kind of travel along with it. So the other issues in terms of the qualifications and whether they should be tendered as experts, I think I see that as something that we can handle through their testimony once they're on the stand and likely to go to weight, not admissibility. So with that, I think we can proceed. And Mr. McDougall, you could call your first witness.
I do have one more housekeeping witness. My two experts are in the courtroom, and I'd ask they be allowed to remain in the courtroom as experts to take in the testimony that's presented.
All right, Ms. Young.
Would suggest that the rule of sequestration prevents that and would object to that.
All right.
They haven't been qualified as experts yet.
They have not. And however, I would anticipate that
they will be.
they've testified. I mean, I can't say I have their CV right in front of me, but they testified as experts before, and so I would anticipate they're likely to be allowed to testify on that behalf. And I don't think the rule of sequestration limits the number of experts that may sit in and review
If you're a fact witness, you cannot watch other people testify. If you're an expert witness, you can watch other people testify. Her point is to become an expert witness, the court has to validate you as that. The judge is basically going down the road of saying, they testified as experts before. Almost always they're going to, once you qualify once or twice or three times, it's very rare for you not to be qualified. So yeah, I think I'm going to let them stay.
Hear each other's testimony. And have you got anything more specific for me? Just Ms. Young, you think makes it, other than that initial bar of, hey, they may not be experts at all, is there anything else under the sequestration you think that keeps them out of the courtroom?
I think we've expressed it in the motion in limine, and you've already ruled on that, so I don't want to belabor the point.
All right, fair enough. Then noted, and I think that I'd find the
At the Fani hearing, he seemed to actually be really on point with making accurate decisions as to how he conducted his hearing. He actually spelled out in his decision a lot of things that many judges would not. He lacked the cojones to really pull the trigger. He only half pulled it by saying either Nathan Wade has to leave or Fani Willis has to leave. But so he seemed to like sort of shy away from taking the ballsy step of saying this case stinks to high heaven and Fani Willis was full of crap. He just implied it with his odor of mendacity, but he seemed to be a little gun shy. That's the scary thing. But as far as running his courtroom, he actually does much better than most judges from what we've seen. So what we saw at that last hearing.
rule is invoked if there are any other witnesses, especially those watching online, Mr. McDougall. So I'd ask you to inform your 7 other potential witnesses, or maybe you alluded to the chair.
I need you to excuse yourself, please. And if I have any other witnesses in the courtroom, please step out. I haven't actually met all of them in person.
Well, that always bodes well. We'll see.
It's a little hazardous, I would say.
All right. All right. With that, you can call your first witness.
I'm called Marcy McCarthy.
I put in the chyron in the bottom who the witness is and
Who
what.
do you prefer to swear the witness, Your Honor?
We have our Deputy Scott will handle that for us.
So make sure to check the chyron and whether it's cross or direct.
Testimony should be the court is the truth and nothing. Help you?
Yes,
Thank
thank you.
Please state.
My name is Marcy McCarthy.
Good morning. Ms. McCarthy, how are you employed?
I own a company called Tech Exec Networks 10. That is how I'm employed.
And how long have you been there?
I have been there since 2010.
And what is the nature of that business?
We are a cybersecurity marketing and events company.
And prior to that, what did you do?
I was the director of marketing for a company called Landcope, which is now owned by SecureWorks, and also a director of marketing for Landcope, which is now owned by Cisco, and then the director of marketing for a company called Landcope.
All right, ma'am. And those businesses, those.
I'm sorry, SecureWorks. I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I was the director of marketing for Landcope, and then director of marketing for SecureWorks, which is now owned by Cisco.
All right, thank you. And what was the nature of that work?
They're cybersecurity companies.
And so how many years experience do you have in the cybersecurity field?
Since 2001.
All right, ma'am. Do you have any involvement with academic institutions relating to cybersecurity?
Yes, I do. I'm an advisor on 2 academic advisory boards, the University of Alabama, Culver House Business School, their cybersecurity advisory board, and Georgia State University, their cybersecurity research board.
Have you ever given presentations or talks on the topic of cybersecurity?
Yes, very regularly. I speak at many different conferences pertaining to cybersecurity.
All right. Your Honor, it may sound like I'm getting ready to qualify her as an expert, but I will not be. It's just to establish familiarity. Where do you reside, ma'am?
I reside in Brookhaven, Georgia.
And you are a citizen of DeKalb County?
Yes, I am.
You are a voter.
Yes, I am.
Do you have anything to do with the DeKalb County Republican Party?
Yes, I'm the chairman of the Republican Party of DeKalb County, Georgia.
And how long have you been in that position?
Since April of 2021, I was reelected in March of 2023, unanimously by acclamation.
Oh,
Um,
it did sound like he was going to be qualifying as an expert witness, but apparently she's like the main person for the petitioner.
That organization is the plaintiff in this case.
That is correct.
All right. There's a binder of exhibits in front of you, and I would ask you to turn to tab number 6.
May I have my readers? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm not too good without the readers. Thank you. And you said 6?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Tell the court what that is.
This is our Georgia incorporation as DeKalb County Republican Party, Inc.
All right. Now turn to tab number 7 and tell us what that is.
This is the DeKalb County Republican Party rules. These are our bylaws.
And for the record, let me state that these are marked as exhibits 6 and 7. All right, Your Honor, I tender applicants exhibits 6 and 7.
All right, any objection to 6 and 7?
Your Honor, we have no objection to 6 and 7. I don't have, well, it's not signed, but I believe her testimony is these are the rules. So I don't think we'd object to those either.
All right, I think she's identified it. It appears properly authenticated. All right, so are we marking these as like as A6 and A7? Is that what we're doing?
That would be better than the way I have them marked now. So yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll say A6 and 7 admitted over objection for 7.
Okay. Can you describe how the DeKalb GOP is governed or how it runs itself?
We are governed by these party rules. These are our bylaws.
And so when the organization makes a decision, how does it do that?
There's a process that we do make decisions. First and foremost, you have to be a voting member of our organization, and that is referred to as a county committee member. So oftentimes our executive committee will meet to bring forth proposals to our county committee for approval. And then the county committee is the decision-making authority of our organization on all expenditures, initiatives, and the like.
All right. So the committee members are all residents of DeKalb County.
The voting members, inclusive of the executive committee, are residents of DeKalb County, Georgia. Yes.
Okay. Do you have non-DeKalb County resident members?
I'm not sure if he's up for re-election in November. I don't know if it was primaries that he was up for in May. I know there was some election that he seemed to have gotten past that was back in like May or so. I don't know if that was a primary or if that was the actual general election, but so I'm really not sure. You might be able to, you could probably Google that though. I know. I'll try and look it up later if I remember.
Yes, we do.
And what is their status relative to the committee and the executive committee?
They're non-voting members. They're just more a professional type of membership where they are able to attend
I'm at
our
1
meetings and
1/4.
events, but they cannot vote on any activities or any actions.
Are any of the members of the party candidates for office?
Yes, actually, we have a total of 14 candidates that are down ballot, 3 that are congressional, 11 that are comprised of state Senate and state House, and 11 overall of these members are voting members of the DeKalb County Republican Party.
All right, ma'am. As the chair of the DeKalb County Republican Party, are you aware, one way or the other, of whether your membership is concerned about election integrity?
Yes, our membership is very concerned about fitness, faith, integrity, and trust in our elections. Many of the people in this courtroom are actually members of the DeKalb County Republican Party here in support of our petition today.
Does your background in the field of cybersecurity have anything to do with the positions you've taken as the chair of the DeKalb County GOP?
Yes, when I was elected and re-elected as the DeKalb County chair, I ran on my number one thing was to first restore and then ensure fitness, faith, integrity, and trust in our elections. And as I mentioned earlier, I was elected unanimously both times.
All right, ma'am. How did you, or when did you first become aware that there was an issue with encryption keys in Georgia's election systems?
I first became aware of the problems when I read a CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Advisory for the United States, as well as an FBI report putting out information on a distributed denial of service attack on the potential for that to happen, also known as a DDoS attack on our election communication equipment. And I was doing research for some speaking engagements as well as some content for our programs. And what a DDoS does is it is a diversion. So it is an immense amount of web traffic that brings down the front door of basically your website. But what's happening on the back end of your infrastructure can be very nefarious. And I was putting together a list of different types of things that would potentially happen for our program and these speaking engagements overall. So they range from ransomware, phishing attacks, as well as exfiltration and upwards type of credentialing where they take over through phishing type of campaigns, advanced persistent threats. And you have no knowledge that this might be happening on the back end because the diversion activities of the DDoS attack take away your resources.
All right, so how did the issue of encryption keys fit into what you just described?
Well, encryption keys are basically the storage and the ability to anonymize data that is going in and authenticate data that would be going in and out of an infrastructure or device.
So, what the encryption key does is it just basically it helps you go in there and no one knows that you're there. as opposed to it being an attack from the outside that you can get around the encryption key and the system will pick it up. It basically is a way of restructuring the entire programming, and no one will ever know it happened. And that's what they asserted in their petition.
Is the encryption keys issue a partisan or ideological issue, to your knowledge?
I wouldn't understand why that would be. You want to have your information stored securely as a end user of a financial services system like our banking system. There's an expectation that it is safe and secure regardless of your political ideology or affiliation. When you check into the doctor's office and share medical information with your providers, again, I don't think that the doctor is asking you if you're a Republican or Democrat. It's an expectation the system that you're using is safe and secure and protecting your information.
So when was it then that you first became aware of the encryption keys issue relative to the Georgia election system?
I became aware of it in late July, early August of this year.
She probably doesn't realize that by leaning so close and breathing into the mic, she's distorting the audio. You can't hear the
How did
audio
the
when you're up
your
there.
county party decide to become the plaintiff or applicant in this case?
Well, we follow our bylaws very strictly. And my concerns as a cybersecurity professional have been raised numerous times with my members overall. So I've offered different types of best practices, quite frankly, from protecting their own identities, how we use our own passwords for applications in our own infrastructure. So with that said, I've been educating my members since I've been in office overall. So the fact of the matter is we are equally concerned about how we are authenticating systems, how we're accessing data in the systems, that everything that resides in there. So they are very concerned about it.
All right. So was there some kind of vote?
Yes. So I presented my concerns to our executive committee and our general counsel, outlining the encryption keys here and the passwords that are not being changed overall, and that the encryption keys themselves are static code in the source code in the database, and that actually defies many best practices around cybersecurity coding overall. And in the commercial world, that would actually be unacceptable. So I presented this information to our executive committee that we pursue a legal action overall to protect all Georgians, quite frankly. My executive committee agreed on the advice of our general counsel, proceeded to present a motion to engage in litigation to our county committee members. There was a vote for that, and actually encryption keys were used. It was anonymized in the voting because we used voting technology, so that we were doing this on a remote basis. And it was what we were able to do is overwhelmingly majority voted in favor to move forward with this litigation.
All right, thank you. What are the purposes of the Dekalb County Republican Party?
Well, our purposes of the Dekalb Republican Party is to vote Dekalb red. So we are there to help our candidates for the first time in decades. We have many candidates on the down ballot, giving our citizens of Dekalb County a choice in our elections. We want to ensure that we have safe and secure elections, and we've done a ton of work with the Dekalb Elections Office, establishing a joint stakeholders organization, which is a collaborative effort with the Democrats, the Republicans, as well as the election office leadership, and have accomplished many different things. Additionally, we have built an amazing infrastructure for our members and for our candidates to be successful.
All right, ma'am. Does this lawsuit align with the purposes of the Dekalb County Republican Party?
100% it does.
That's all the questions I have for you, Ms. McCarthy.
Thank you.
Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Brian Tyson, for the secretary. Good morning, Ms. McCarthy. My name is Brian Tyson. I represent Secretary Raffensperger. I just have a few additional questions for you.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned that you followed issues related to encryption in voting machines for a while. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you closely followed the Curling versus Raffensperger trial earlier this year, right?
Yes, I paid attention to that case.
And in fact, you appeared on multiple media platforms giving updates on the case. Is that right?
Yes, I'm often asked to be interviewed by different media, different media outlets to speak on a number of different topics, including this one.
And one part of the Curling case involved Dr. Halderman's report. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And Dr. Halderman, in his report, specifically discussed issues related to encryption.
In the petition, they cite to this Halderman case, which was a few months ago, and they basically say there were certain findings of fact which support the claims by the petitioners that that there's really grossly disturbing issues with the encryption keys. That the claim they use is basically like having a bank vault and putting the code for the vault on the outside of the door. That's what the finding was. That's what they were saying in the Haldeman case. That's what the experts were testifying to.
Keys, right?
That is correct.
When did you first read Dr. Haldeman's report?
After it came out in June of 2023.
So in June of 2023, you read what Dr. Haldeman had to say about encryption keys, right?
Yes, I did.
And you have, as you testified, some background and experience in those areas, right?
That is correct.
And I believe Dr. Haldeman's report, you said, was released in the summer of 2023. Is that right?
June of 2023. Well, to the public, you had it a lot longer.
And
Nice.
you appeared on the John Frederick Show in January 2024 to discuss the curling trial, right?
I regularly appear on John Frederick's show.
Now, you're aware that the state Republican Party passed a resolution about voting equipment after the 2020.
The line of question he's going down implies that he's attacking her on a laches basis. Again, laches means delay. You should come here in June. You should have come here. Why did you wait till the eve of the election? That's the line of questioning that he's going down here.
20 election, right?
Yes.
And you supported that resolution?
Yes, I support it.
And you personally opposed the use of Dominion voting machines in Georgia elections?
I oppose the use of equipment that cannot be verified and trusted.
And that would include the Dominion voting machines, in your view, right?
Well, actually, yes, because you cannot trust and verify our vote right now in Georgia.
And you testified as well before the 2020 committee chaired by Senator Ligon after the 2020 election, right?
That is correct.
And did you do research on the Dominion system at that time?
No, I was a vote review panelist in Dekalb County, Georgia, and I was testifying on the lack of controls, inclusive of passwords and checks and balances with the adjudication process of our absentee ballots. And specifically, what I did testify on, it was the fact of the matter is that there were almost 900 absentee ballots that were improperly adjudicated. They had no locks and controls on them, and they were adjudicated first by a bipartisan pair using the Dominion equipment. Then they were put into a suspense mode to a nonpartisan pair, which actually broke the laws of how adjudication is supposed to be done with absentee ballots. And that nonpartisan pair, there was no log files for them logging into a system, and we all were using same passwords. Mind you, there were even no locks and controls on the absentee ballots themselves, allowing them to change anything on those ballots. And the most common error of those ballots was the race for U.S. Senate, the special election that was there, where there was a jungle primary going on. So there was not a traditional nature of one or two candidates there. I believe that there were 18 candidates. And the most common error was the voters were filling in overvotes for all the Democrat candidates. And it was based on a nonpartisan pair who was represented by the League of Women Voters, who are actually more Democrat than the Democrats in the room. So they had full control of those ballots. And we still don't know present day if those ballots were accurate.
You're aware that issues related to encryption keys were raised in Arizona litigation too, right?
I didn't follow that case.
Now, you mentioned you were doing research on a report on the distributed denial of service attacks from the FBI and CISA when you started doing research on this issue. Is that right?
That is correct.
And a DDoS attack, or DDoS attack, I believe as you referred to it, involves internet-connected systems, right?
That is correct.
And you're aware that SEB rules govern the security of voting system components in Georgia, right?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And you're aware that one of those rules is that they cannot be connected to the internet, right?
I'm aware of that as well. But let me just add to that, okay? The DDoS attack that's happening on the front door is a diversion. So what's happening on the inside of your infrastructure, whether they're directly connected or not, can be a diversion of your resources. So the fact of the matter is what's happening on the front door, because your website is forward facing. And if it did occur on election night, quite frankly, a DDoS attack, and several have already occurred in present day, preeminent to it. When Twitter Spaces had Elon Musk and President Trump there was a major amount of web traffic activity. In addition, there was a DDoS attack. Additionally, in Florida, okay, just a few weeks ago during their primary, there was a election communication company that experienced a high volume of traffic with an election that had very little election activity, making it near impossible to the county election offices that subscribe to these services to access, for the public to access their information. So the diversion activities that were taking place with the limited resources in security organizations across the board, exfiltration happens on the back end, or access to systems on the back end are very obscure and often are undetected.
This is he. By the way, she's giving great answers, and he's doing very poor lawyering because as cross-examining her, she's going well beyond the question he's asking and going off on her own little diatribe here, which is great for the petitioner side, for those of us who are hoping that to get relief here. I'm just noting that it's poor lawyering on his part because he should be shutting her up. If he was a more effective lawyer, he would be shutting her up.
In your work on cybersecurity, you're aware that physical security is an important part of overall cybersecurity, right?
That is actually in tandem. So you have everything from biometrics to physical security and log files. But, when I was adjudicating ballots in Dekalb County, Georgia, there wasn't even a sign-in system to the machines that I was sitting in front of when I was sitting there, or even an adjudicator that was sitting next to me. We simply signed into the elections office and we're sitting there for hours and hours. And then there were batches of ballots that would come about. So the best practices of the Secretary of State's offices, as it pertains to log files, password management, is despicable. It would not hold up in the commercial sector.
Let me ask you about.
You see, he asks her like pretty much a yes or no question, and she ends up giving like a 90-second answer to basically explain her position. He should just be saying, the question is yes or no question. Please just say yes or no. That's what he should be doing. But he's a little bit like most neocons. He's too much of a wuss. Encryption key should not be stored as plain text in database. That's another claim that wasn't a petition. That they have it as plain text. You could just read what the encryption key is, as opposed to it being veiled in there. Encryption keys convert data from legible to unusable without the key. This is bad, Joe. You're saying it's bad. It's bad in how exposed it is, I assume. And yeah, that's why they're trying to fix it. Change the encryption keys.
The allegations you have here in this case, you are not aware of any actual manipulation of election results in Georgia based on the claims you brought in this case, right?
Who gives
Our
a
Secretary
damn?
of State and Gabe Sterling,
If you could answer yes or no, and then you can explain your answer.
certainly, they remain unproven because the fact of the matter is Gabe Sterling, our Chief Operating Officer, I believe that's his title in the present day. It changes frequently, as well as the Secretary of State, make gracious claims on media and in public, social media, stating that Georgia has the most safe and secure elections, not just in the country, but in the world. So you just put a target on Georgia's back and head to prove our elections to be safe and secure. The onus is on the Secretary of State's office. He is the custodian of our elections. So we have the right as citizens to ensure that we trust our election outcomes as well as now verify them.
She's nailing
And my
it.
question was a little more specific. Are you aware of any actual manipulation of Georgia election results that have occurred on the Dominion system?
There's still a lot of unexplained activities that have occurred over the last 4 years that are still being litigated or reviewed by our State Board of Elections, as well as into the court system. So it remains unknown in present day.
And you personally believe that voters can never know for sure whether the voting equipment accurately reported that Joe Biden won Georgia in 2020, right?
Well, that is correct because you have a proprietary QR code that is doing the tabulation. That QR code, quite frankly, can even be read by a phone that reads a menu or it takes you to a website. So you're asking us to trust and verify a ballot that has clear text on there, but not using that to be tabulated overall. I can't read proprietary QR codes, and neither can my phone, which is actually illegal to have in a voting precinct.
And you personally would support a system where Georgia voters vote on hand-marked paper ballots, correct?
Yes.
I would support a system
Everyone
that
with a
we can
brain would.
understand, and it is in clear text that our tabulation is taking place. So what I enter on my ballot, it can be trusted, verified. That is what is being tabulated on the back end. Yes.
And you don't believe the Dominion system today provides that?
Why would you have a proprietary code?
Answer yes or no?
I don't trust those systems, and many people don't.
And you would say as well that your goals in this case are similar to the goals of the plaintiffs in the Curling case, right?
You see, now she's starting to lose it. She's getting a little too emotional here, and that's what he wants. He wants to bait her into basically making her look like some kook who doesn't trust, what everyone else knows to be truth. Knows to be truth. So that's what his objective is here.
No, we're simply asking for a prayer for relief here today. Is trust and validation, a simple validation of the election equipment that is in place. We're not asking it for being removed. We're simply asking for a validation by a third party to ensure that no one has tampered with anything, no one has touched anything, and what was entered in there was correct. And there's a number of ways to do that.
Just a moment, Your Honor.
Well, while you're conferring, Mr. Tyson, let me ask you a question, Ms. McCarthy. There was reference to I believe it was the Haldeman report you referred to. I haven't reviewed that. Did that ever have any specific discussion of how Georgia was handling its encryption keys?
That report was created for Georgia in the Curling versus Raffensperger case.
All right. So the core of how you believe the encryption keys are being handled in this case, was that discussed in that report?
Yes, it is. Numerous other cybersecurity endeavors. Yes.
Very much so.
And that
Yes.
was something you read when it was released in June 2023.
Yes, I did.
Mr. Tyson, you can follow up on that or anything else, and then I'll turn it back to Mr. McDougall.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Mr. McDougall, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Ms. McCarthy, to your recollection, in the Haldeman report, is there any discussion of the relationship between encryption keys on the one hand and certification standards on the other?
There is a correlation there. The certification has to be done in alignment with the law.
But in the Haldeman report, when you read that, to your recollection, does it discuss certification issues or just encryption keys issue, if you remember?
I don't remember specifically, but I do remember that the numerous tests were done in Haldeman's lab and performed them over a several week period and indicated that the machines themselves can be accessed and changed or manipulated both on premise and off premise, so illicit and illicit access.
All right, ma'am. And when did you first connect, in your mind, the encryption keys issue with the certification issue?
Well, we're talking about certification of elections by our board members, our state and county board members across the board.
Let me
So
rephrase the question.
Okay.
When did you first connect encryption keys issue with EAC certification?
starting to dig into deeper, I would say probably more in the September timeframe, just to create better understanding
Of what year?
this year.
To your understanding, would an exploitation of encryption keys be detectable after the fact?
No, because the intrusion detection system that is being used, as I understand it, is the base model of the escort, quite frankly, and would not be acceptable in the commercial private sector. It doesn't have any bells and whistles. It's simply there as a device that's adjoining to it, and it doesn't have an ability to really respond and react, and certainly doesn't have any ability to prevent any types of intrusions. You're simply relying on log files after the fact.
That's all I have. Your Honor.
Thank you.
Recross on those points, Mr. Tyson.
No, Your Honor.
Do can this witness be excused?
You may be excused.
All right,
Your Honor.
thank
Thank you.
Step down. You do it and call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We will take up the court's suggestion to put our experts up before the authentication witnesses so that we can get them up and down.
All right. And so your next witness is?
I call Clay Parikh to the stand.
Well, for that testimony, you get okay.
Yes, I do.
Please state, spell your first and last name for the court.
My name is Clay Parikh. It's ClayParikh.
All right, Mr. Parikh, where do you live?
I live in Huntsville, Alabama.
How are you employed?
I'm employed as a cybersecurity analyst for Northrop Grumman.
Give us a brief rundown of your employment history.
I've worked for all the major Department of Defense contractors. I've also done work in the private sector. I've done vulnerability management, site design. I've played threat, which is known as red teaming or acting like the bad guy. And I've also done systems testing, to include system testing in voting system test labs.
Tell us about the voting system test labs work.
I was approached by a professional staffing company that was looking for a cybersecurity expert that had a CISSP, which is a Certified Information System Security Professional. And I went and looked at that, and it was a way for me to keep my technical skills up because it was to perform security testing at these voting system test labs.
And how long did you do that work?
I did that over a 9-year time span.
And okay, what is your educational background?
I have a master's of science in cybersecurity. My undergrad is a bachelor of science in computer science.
All right. Do you have any military service?
Yes, my first profession was as a United States Marine.
And how long were you in the Marine Corps?
22 years.
And what type of work did you do for the Marine Corps?
I did whatever I was told to do.
Did any of it relate to cybersecurity, or was it digging holes?
No, we had security, and if you in the
Do whatever
CISSP
you
realm,
tell me
there
to,
are 10
sir.
domains that they talk about, and they deal with physical security,
You a goddamn
encryption. I
genius,
work in
Private Gump.
what's known as the CMS vault, where encryption materials were stored. So you learn about chain of custody, procedural stuff. Then, of course, there's always physical security.
All right, sir. You've covered this a little bit, but tell us anything else that you haven't told us that has to do with professional background in cybersecurity.
I've done the cybersecurity realm for over 20 years. I've held the CISSP for over 17 years in good standing, certified plenty of professionals under that certification. I was certified ethical hacker for, I believe, 15 years.
But just to give you some background, okay? In order to be qualified as an expert witness, you need to basically explain your background expertise, and the court has to agree that you're an expert. Until you're qualified, you're not considered an expert witness, and you change nature from being a fact witness, someone who's seen something and testifying about that which he has seen and experienced himself, into being an expert witness. An expert witness has a lot of different rules once they get qualified as an expert. This is the qualification process where the judge is deciding, is this person going to be accepted as an expert? Once they're accepted as experts, they can testify about their opinion, which you cannot do when you're a fact witness. And they also can testify about things that they've never seen firsthand, just about how the world operates, or how things that fall within the domain of the area that they're qualified as an expert. When you're qualified as an expert, the judge normally will explain the area, will label the area you're qualified, and only allow you to testify as an expert in those areas that you have been qualified, because that's what your expertise is. And you can't, just because you can be an expert cardiologist, that doesn't mean you know podiatry. Doesn't mean you know brain surgery. So you have to be qualified in the area you're going to testify about, and that's why they usually make it as broad as possible, that they get the qualification and allow him as much latitude as needed. So this is the qualification process. Often they'll give the defense, the opposition, an opportunity to cross-examine and try and show that the person is not an expert, that he's kind of an idiot or too ill-experienced. This guy has been qualified as an expert in other hearings, which means it's very likely that once you get accepted, and that's part of what the court will use. If you've been qualified in the past, they'll accept you again now. So, and I'm fairly certain he has been qualified multiple times in the past, so he's likely to be accepted. It's rare for someone to be rejected, but they're not always accepted. I would say it's well over 90% that someone gets put up there as an expert gets accepted, at least on some basis.
And a cyber forensic hacking investigator for 12 years.
All right. Do you have any experience in performing cyber investigations in criminal investigations?
Yes, I have.
Describe that what government were you working for and so forth?
I was working for the U.S. government, and in general terms, I would just say the investigations were with three-letter agencies, and one was with NASA, and the other two were Department of Defense related.
In the course of your training, experience, and education, have you had any experience with encryption keys?
Yes, quite extensive.
Can you describe the purpose of using encryption keys?
Encryption keys it's the part of cryptography that is to keep confidentiality involved. And so you use them to encrypt and decrypt files. You can use the security certificates and stuff for secure communications. It's basically a form of confidentiality under credentials management.
All right, sir. Are you familiar with how encryption keys are supposed to be handled?
Yes.
What cybersecurity experience do you have with respect to electronic or computerized voting systems?
I was a security tester for several of the voting system test labs during that 9-year period.
Did you do any test work on Dominion systems?
Yes.
What is the EAC?
The EAC is the Election Assistance Commission, which was established under the HAVA, the Help America Vote Act.
And this testing lab work you did, does that have anything to do with EAC certification of election systems?
Yes, it does. The EAC has these certification labs. The voting system testing laboratories have to go through a certification process themselves, which NIST co-chairs with the EAC.
What's NIST?
It's a governing body that looks over technology and laboratory research, and they do the laboratory inspection part of the voting system test labs. That's not really in the EAC's cog.
Is that the National Institute of Standards?
Tech-
Technical?
Technology.
Um, In the course of your test lab work on election systems, did you ever attempt penetration or hacking of those systems?
Yes, I did.
And how long would it take you to get into one of those systems?
5 to 10 minutes. My best time's 2.5 minutes.
Can you describe the difference between an insider threat and an outsider threat in cybersecurity terms?
An insider threat, there are basically two types. An outsider threat is someone totally out of the organization that has relatively no knowledge or access. An insider threat is an authorized person. And this can be done. There's two categories, accidental and intentional. And of course, intentional would be like sabotage and stuff like that, negligence, that. The thing about insider threat is it not only includes the organization, it includes any contractors or vendors who have access to said systems. For example, it could even include janitors that do. Because
The nature of the questions he's asking now is a little bit unusual. Normally, you would have him qualify as an expert before you start testing it, before you start having him explain all this sort of thing. I assume he's going to have him qualified as or ask the court to qualify him as an expert. That's when they cross over into technically being deemed an expert witness. This sort of question is the sort of question you would ask of an expert. I guess he's trying to use it to validate that he knows what he's talking about and prove to the court that he knows what he's talking about. But I'm just pointing out it's a little unorthodox the way this is going right now. Normally, you just ask about their resume, the background, the history and experience, and how many years they've been doing it, and articles they've written, and times they've testified, and then you get them qualified before you start asking questions like the ones that McDougald is asking now.
the physical security aspect.
And so the vendor of an election system would be within the rubric.
Insider threat realm. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir.
All right. You have a binder on the table in front of you, and I ask you to turn to tab number 14. And there's a document there that is marked as Exhibit 14, which is applicant's Exhibit 14. Can you identify that document?
Yes, this is my resume.
All right, sir. And if you would turn to tab number 15. And the document marked there as Exhibit 15, tell the court what that is.
Yes, this is the cover letter that whenever I applied for jobs that I always submitted, it includes my additional work experience and cyber experience outside of the normal DoD world contracting. Because it states, I was an avid member of InfoGuard, which is an organization underneath the Federal Bureau of Investigations. I participated in that, and it lists the voting system test lab work and experience.
All right. Now, you mentioned a certification you had, CISSP. Are there any other certifications that you have?
Yes, I had the Certified Ethical Hacker and the CHFI, which is a Certified Hacking Forensic Investigator.
All right, Your Honor, at this point, I would tender applicants Exhibits 16 and 17.
14 and 15?
14 and 15.
14 and 15, I apologize. Thank you for the
Any
correction.
objection to 14 and 15?
No objection, Your
All
Honor.
right, admitted without objection.
In the course of your work at the testing lab, did you become familiar with the requirements for an election system to be certified by the EAC?
Yes, it was one of the very first things that I had to do. The very first laboratory I worked for was Wiley Laboratories, and they wanted to become a certified lab. And so they submitted their testing procedures to me to do an independent review, and they were going to submit that review to the EAC as evidence to help them that their procedures were sound. So therefore, I had to read what is known as the VSS, which were under the Federal Elections Commission's very old guidelines, and then I read the HAVA Act itself, and then the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines.
He looks familiar to me
and
too.
two that were out at the time.
All right, sir.
I knew how to spell his
Uh,
last name
What system is election
before he
system is
told
used
us
in Georgia?
because I've seen
It
his
is a
name
Dominion
before.
System DVS 5.5 Alpha.
And is that system, to your knowledge, certified by the EAC?
Yes, it's required to.
All right, sir. Are you familiar with the Dominion system that's used in Georgia?
Yes, I'm very familiar.
How are you familiar with it?
I've reviewed a lot of the system log information as well as for the databases that were provided via public record request.
Is the EAC certification document for the Dominion system used in Georgia available on the internet, the certification document?
Yes, it resides on the EAC's website.
All right, sir, if you would please turn to exhibit tab number 16. And do you recognize that document?
Yes, this is a printout of the document. All right. Yes, 16 lists the Dominion system.
All right, sir, and the second paragraph of the text, well, before I ask him to read from it, Your Honor, I would tender exhibit number 16.
Objection to A16.
No objection.
Admitted.
All right, Mr. Parikh, in the second paragraph of the text, starting voting systems, what does that tell us?
It says voting systems will be tested against the voluntary voting system guidelines, VVSG, which are a set of specifications and requirements to determine if the systems provide all of the basic functionality, accessibility, and security capabilities required. And I might add that there's also a state's requirements document that the EAC maintains. This is how the states get their HAVA grant money from year to year. That's one of the requirements of HAVA. Each state had to submit a plan originally when HAVA was created to the EAC and have it approved. And it lists Georgia. And in that document, it states the Georgia law applicable, where it also states that it has to be federally certified. And then the Secretary of State also has to certify it.
All right, sir. And so your testing was, as this Exhibit 16 describes, against the voluntary voting system guidelines?
Yes.
All right, turn to tab number 17. And there's a document there marked as Exhibit number 17. Can you identify that for the court?
Yes, this is the certificate of conformance, which is generated by the EAC from the test report that's submitted by the lab and reviewed. They submit a certification certificate on the front of it, but they call it certificate of conformance, and then it lists their evaluation of the voting system testing report.
And this is for what system?
It's a model version 5.5 alpha.
And that's the one in use in Georgia?
Yes.
All right, Your Honor, I tender applicant's Exhibit 17.
No objection.
A17 is admitted.
How would you describe your familiarity with the provisions of the voluntary voting systems guidelines?
I'm very familiar with them. I've actually been sat at the table with the EAC components that included the NIST representatives, and because they used to come around and audit the voting system test labs and check them annually. And part of the thing is I would always get called in to speak to them, and they would ask me some questions. And I've actually commented on the voluntary voting system guidelines specifically because to me they're not standards, they're substandards. They do not meet the level of security requirements required for systems of high importance or criticality.
Okay, sir. I'll now ask you to turn to tab number 19. And that is marked on the upper left as Exhibit number 19. And if you can identify that for the court.
This is the 2005 voluntary voting system guidelines.
And is that the version of the VVSG that was used in the EAC certification in Exhibit number 18?
Yes, it is.
All right, Your Honor, I tender Exhibit number 19, applicant's Exhibit number 19.
No objection.
All right, and are you going back to 18 or are you also doing that as well?
I'm skipping 18.
Okay, Exhibit 19 is admitted.
Does the VVSG address cybersecurity requirements?
Yes.
Now, and you're familiar with those requirements?
Yes, I am.
Do you know what FIPS 140-2 is?
Yes, I do.
And how do you know that?
I had to repeatedly read it and explain to the software developers from the vendors exactly what it meant and how they have to properly implement it. And I've dealt with multiple vendors on this.
All right, sir. Turn to tab number 20, please. And that's a document marked Exhibit number 20, applicant's Exhibit number 20. Can you tell the court what that is?
That is FIPS Publication 140-2.
I tender applicant's Exhibit number 20, Your Honor.
No objection.
Exhibit 20 is admitted.
Are you familiar with how encryption keys are employed in electronic voting systems?
Yes, I am.
Are you familiar with how they're used in the Dominion system used in Georgia?
Yes, I am.
Are they important? Are they important?
They are highly important. That is the integrity of the whole entire system.
All right. And are you familiar with the EAC certification requirements with respect to encryption keys?
Yes, I am.
Are you familiar with the EAC certification requirements with respect to storage and management of encryption keys?
Yes.
Are you familiar with what FIPS 140-2 has to say about encryption keys?
And their management requirements, yes.
Have you had occasion to examine any election databases of any Georgia counties that were used in the 2020 November election or recount?
Yes, I've examined 4 databases from Georgia.
What county, sir?
They were Appling, Bibb, Jones, and Telfair.
Have you examined those databases from from those counties with respect to encryption keys?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever been qualified to testify as an expert before, admitted to testify as an expert before?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Related to election stuff 3 times for sure.
And how about other issues, other cyber issues?
A handful.
As any of your expert testimony where you were allowed to testify related to a Dominion system?
Yes.
Your Honor, I tender Mr. Parikh as an expert on cybersecurity, EAC certification requirements for election systems, including the Dominion system in Georgia, how they handle encryption keys, and what the requirements are for certification on encryption keys.
Now, notice how he's specified these are the areas I'm tendering him as an expert, because you need to clarify exactly where he's allowed to testify about his opinion.
All right. Any voir dire of the witness, Mr. Tyson?
Yes, Your Honor, if I could, voir dire.
The voir dire is the opportunity for the defense to claim should not be validated, and there's going to be questioned now by the defense for them to try and show that he's not sufficiently expert to be qualified as an expert.
Good morning, Mr. Parikh. My name is Brian Tyson. I represent the Secretary. Appreciate your service to our country and the Marines. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask a couple of additional questions about your background and experience. Now, you indicated you worked for different voting system test labs that were certified by the EAC, right?
That's correct.
And you worked with ProVNV, but you were not directly employed by ProVNV.
No,
right?
I went through a professional staffing company.
And so you were not an employee of ProVNV. You worked for a staffing company that ProVNV retained.
Yes.
And ProVNV is the voting system test lab that certified or that was involved in the certification of the Dominion system that's used in Georgia, right?
Yes.
And you last did any work with ProVNV in 2017, correct?
That is correct.
Was 2017 also the last time you laid hands on any Dominion voting equipment?
The actual hardware equipment? Yes, sir.
And you've never reviewed the current Dominion 5.5A software in your role at any voting system test lab, right?
Not in the role as a voting system test lab, but I have reviewed plenty of forensic reports and reports that have been evaluated and can confirm most of them are true.
And you've not reviewed the Dominion 5.5A software in Georgia, is that right?
Reviewing the software, and this is according to ProVNV Lab, they never allowed security checks of the software. No voting system laboratory, which to me was highly strange. Normally, you test software as for its functionality, its components, and the basic functions, but then it's required a security review because, for example, an administrative console can be manipulated. So it has to be security reviewed in how it functions. And that's normally, I work in a classified environment for the Missile Defense Agency, and that's how it's always done. First by the software developers and then by security.
Let me ask a better question. In terms of your...
And the fact that he worked in a classified environment, I think likely weighs significantly in the judge's opinion that, yeah, the government seems to think that he knows what he's doing here, which is kind of ironic that now a different wing of the government, of the state government, is questioning his expertise when the federal government seems to be okay with him as being an expert.
The opinion you're offering in this case, you're relying on your review of 4 databases, not of the Dominion voting system writ large. Is that right?
Yes, sir. But you're ignoring the fact that software development, they create an image and a versioning number, and the version used here is used across multiple states.
And you're not offering any opinions about the degree of risk. Is that right?
If you're asking me about the risk with these systems, the risk is highly. They have no integrity.
Let me ask this. Did you rely on Dr. Halderman's report for any of the findings in your declaration?
I've reviewed Dr. Haldeman's report, and a lot of the vulnerabilities that he pointed out were things that I'd already knew and reported to test labs, but never made it to final reports.
And you reviewed the databases that were provided to you by Voter GA, is that right?
That's correct.
Are you being paid for your work?
As far as my investigative work?
For your testimony and your work in this
Yes,
case?
for my testimony, yes, I am.
Okay. And what is your hourly rate?
My hourly rate is $250.
And Mr. McDougall had asked you about courts that accepted testimony from you. Has any court ever excluded you from testifying as an expert?
No.
Whoops. You
So I
don't
have,
ask
Your Honor,
that
I think at
question.
this point, if it's appropriate, I'd go ahead and raise an objection to the scope of what's being offered here. Our motion in limine lays out our concerns, Mr. Parik's testimony and offering opinions. Also, his testimony that he has only reviewed the databases and not the software itself, hasn't touched the Dominion equipment since 2017. Mr. McDougall's expansive scope of his opinions to cover everything related to Dominion 5.5 as used in Georgia,
Every
we think
lawyer
is
is going to
also
ask
beyond
it.
what he should be allowed to testify to.
All right, that was a lot, Mr. McDougall, that you asked kind of the fields of qualification. Let's just nail those down. It's in cybersecurity, EAC requirements, encryption keys. Did I catch it all?
Certification, how that relates to certification, how those are used in the Dominion system.
All right, and other than what's already been raised in the motion in limine about the scope, how would you respond to these issues raised by Mr. Tyson concerning maybe the
It is.
how recent his
Yeah.
review has been?
And I think
Data.
I might be able to address that by posing a few more questions about what his analysis of the databases entail. If I could,
All right.
would leave a court to do that.
Renew your tendering after that's done.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Parikh, can you describe what analyses you applied to the 4 election databases that you mentioned from Appling, Bibb, Jones, and Telfair counties?
As far as everything that I checked within the database, the very first thing is I restored these backup databases and was successful with all of them, like all the other databases were. If I did not get the database, I got a backup copy and proved to that. Then I compared it against other state systems, which had different versioning, which had the same database structure. They had a lot of the same stored procedures, which I might add are way too many. And they were the same functionality across different versionings. I can also state that I've reviewed Dominion correspondence that refers to how they handle software versioning, but I don't think that's in the scope of this hearing, but it's not the best practice.
Are you, in the course of your analysis of these databases, were you able to run, how did you examine? I mean, what did you do? What tools, what software? How did you figure out what you figured out?
I used everything that was on the voting system, which from a security perspective is atrocious because all you have to do is gain access and you're in. And as my demonstrations will show, I use the tools on the system. These tools that are on these systems would not be found in the DoD operational environment, in the financials on the system environment. These compilers on there, there's actual where the database resides, the management studio. These are all
So what
worst practice.
does that
worst
mean?
practice.
What does the management studio mean and how did you use it to examine the database?
That and the command line component does. I have free access to the database. And again, they use the operating system, the Windows login credentials, which when I access the system, I entered without a password, which is easy.
Were you able to run Dominion software as a part of your analysis of these systems?
Yes, and components on the software, yes.
And how did you do that on your machine without having a Dominion machine?
As part of forensic investigations, the very first thing you do when you collect evidence is you create your hashes to verify the integrity of the system. You put the evidence away, you have that copy, and then you usually make another copy and you get the hashes of that because you have to have a detailed chain of custody when you're dealing with evidence. And usually to expedite forensic investigations, you want the live system to pull it up. So what I did was from one of the image files of a Dominion system, I created a virtual machine. I then easily hacked into the virtual machine. And once I logged in, I had access to the database. I could manipulate the databases and control it.
And find out how the encryption keys were stored?
Yes, sir.
All right, sir. And do you think your testimony would help the court understand the issue of encryption keys and how they're used in the Dominion system and how that relates to EAC certification?
Yes, sir. And the importance of encryption keys that they're dealing with in the X059 certificate, specifically the X059 certificate. It's a security certificate that's used for communications.
And were the databases that were provided to you, are they a sufficient basis for you to form a reliable opinion?
Yes, they are.
Did you apply any particular principles or methods to your analysis?
Yes, I use standard testing methods and forensic steps.
And do they reliably support the opinions that you've reached here as well as in other cases?
Yes, sir, they do. As if I put my declarations under threat of perjury and submitted to the U.S. Supreme Court, I stand by 100% of what I've written.
All right, I renew my tender, Your Honor.
All right, based on the testimony I've heard so far and the voir dire of the witness, I do find this witness possesses information beyond the ken of the average layman, and that on the databases he reviewed, he has relevant information to share as it relates to the issues raised here, and concerns or objections that are preserved go to their weight, not their admissibility. So you may proceed, Mr. Duke.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Mr. Parikh.
And that was fairly predictable. It's nice that he got the wide berth that he got, though.
Are encryption keys any part of the Dominion system used here in Georgia?
Yes, they are.
How are they used in the system here in Georgia?
They're used to encrypt some of the username passwords, which is not a really very good standard. They should always use hashes, but there are also hashes that are weak and vulnerable. They're left unprotected, but they use the Raindale encryption key and its vector as their private keys, which those are supposed to be protected. Then they also use the XO59 certificate, which is used for authentication. And this establishes trust between the system components. And then there's an HMAC key that's also, and these are all stored in the same unsecure table within the database.
All right, sir. And in light of how these, well, you said you used the word Raindale.
Raindale, yes, sir.
Help the court understand what in the world that is.
Raindale was that encryption algorithm that's used to create those keys. There were actually 3 people. He was the main person that submitted for the keys. And it's an encryption algorithm. That's just industry standard.
And it's named after a fellow named Raindale,
Yes.
but it's spelled, it doesn't,
Raindale, yes, he's Indian.
okay. In light of how these encryption keys are used in the system, are they important to the security of the system?
They are vital to the security of the system and the integrity of the system.
If a bad actor who has a little bit of skill knows what they're doing and has access to the system and access to the encryption keys, is that system secure?
No, it is not,
Why not?
because they could do anything. They can decrypt the configuration files, which are encrypted for for example, the tabulator components. And so I could make the tabulator, they could easily manipulate that, make it do whatever. They can decrypt the information coming back to the election management system, the EMS. They could manipulate the ballot images. They can manipulate the cast vote record. They could do any number of things.
What is the cast vote record?
The cast vote record contains the data, the ballot images, but it's basically the results from the tabulator.
Under the applicable standards of the VVSG and FIPS 140-2, how should encryption keys be stored or kept or managed on the Dominion system?
The management and storage of encryption keys are when they're in plain text, it's only within the cryptographic module. If they're taken outside the cryptographic module, they must be securely protected.
And is the way they are kept on the Dominion system in Georgia, does it comply with that requirement?
No, it does not. They're in an insecure operating system, information system, with hundreds of vulnerabilities. The database, and I've had database experts assist me in analysis, that they are not configured properly. They do not log properly, as I'm sure Mr. Cotton could testify to, which leads you hard to do a forensic investigation and determine cause analysis. Even a system administrator tech would be lacking information. And so there's lack of logging. The database, these encryption keys would be considered confidential. It's the same thing as like a doctor's office who has your medical PII information, or your bank that any business that deals with credit cards, for example, would have to protect the database. And you can protect the table, you can protect the row, you can encrypt the whole entire database. And that is not done. And to use the operating system's password and authentication to get into the database is not best practice. And again, I did it without a password at all.
And so how are the encryption keys in fact stored in these election databases?
They're in plain text, unencrypted, in an insecure database.
And so that is not the cryptographic.
That's a violation of FIPS 140-2.
Because it's not in an encrypted or cryptographic module.
That is correct.
FIPS is a standard that EAC mandates that they have to keep compliant with in order for it to be valid. The key argument here that the state is making is that we don't have to maintain and ensure that it continues to be compliant with FIPS and EAC. We just need to know that at one point in time when it was approved by Brad Raffensperger, he found it to be adequate. That's really what the key is, which sounds ludicrous, but that doesn't change the fact that that's what their main argument is. I don't think that that's necessary. I doubt that's, hopefully that's not going to wash with the judge. It doesn't seem like it will wash with the judge. So that's why they're trying to establish that not only is that not their duty, but they failed in their duty And that failure has basically led to all sorts of gaping holes in the cybersecurity of Georgia's election system process.
And does that comply with the VVSG?
No, it does not.
Does that comply with the EAC certification requirements?
No, it does not. And if I can add, the VVSG, because of the way Georgia state law states, they're not voluntary now. They're now system requirements. They're standards. That standard is a requirement and should be mandatory because Georgia law states that it has to be federally certified.
And Your Honor, just move to strike that last answer regarding the legal implications here.
All right, I don't think we actually strike anything for the record, but your objection is noted and it'll be given the weight it deserves.
Are there any particular sections of the VVSG that are most particularly applicable to the management of the encryption keys?
Section 7 of Volume 1 is the primary security. Security is also mentioned in sections 4 and 6, but those the main parts of those deal with that. Volume 2 also talks about security and from an operational perspective and the risk involved. But Section 8 talks about the quality and they mentioned the life cycle management, which means it's an operational thing because the life cycle of any information system is from birth to death, and therefore you have to patch it, you have to do security updates, you have to meet all your requirements 100% of the time. It's not something where I get certified and I get connected to the network and I'm good. For example, in my work, when they take, I'm sorry, I got to pause because I got to keep this unclassified. But so in the software that we develop, if they take the system off to reload the application software, there's a whole process that's done, and we have configuration management. If you related it to election system engineering change orders, and so when they get that approved, the software developers finish their job, the techs finish their job. The last part is part of the QA where the security checks are done, and it has to be certified by the group that I work in, the information security officers, before it can be reconnected to the network. So that's the part about quality in the lifecycle management.
All right, sir. And so the VVSG speaks to life cycle compliance.
Yes,
And what part do you recall?
that's in section 8.1, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, would there be any point to having a test standards requirement for cybersecurity that was inapplicable in the operational environment?
No, that would make no sense whatsoever.
So you've had an opportunity to examine election databases from the 4 counties. How did it come about that you examined those databases?
I was able to obtain them to compare them with other databases in different states that I was doing as part of the Arizona. I don't know what it was called when it went to back to the Supreme Court, but that was my evaluation. And because based on that, the investigation and the evidence found, the Arizona Senate allowed me to get their 2020 database as well and to discover the same inconsistencies.
Okay. What was your understanding of how the 4 Georgia County databases were obtained and made available to you?
They were given by the counties under a public's record request.
And how did you get a hold of them?
In my investigation and the other system components that I've looked at as far as system log files and answering questions on what the log information did, because I can interpret that and give them meaning to the components. I was made aware of them and I asked for them to review them to see, because again, this is software development. This is not just specific to the state of Georgia. This pretty much, my educated guess would be, this is even outside of the versions we're talking about. It's been demonstrated.
Let me stop you for just a second, because I think my question may not have been clear. How did you obtain a copy of the election databases for these 4 counties?
I was given access to the voter GA directory, and then I downloaded them from there, and then of course created my hash files.
All right, sir. In general terms, how do the backup databases that you obtained and then restored compare to the actual operational database used in elections?
It's the same database. It's the same exact database. The only difference between that and an operational database would be alive. If the system's up and functioning and that database is used on a daily basis, it's going to contain things. The backup database would be a snapshot in time.
All right, sir. And are the way the encryption keys were found in the backup databases? Is that the same as how they are stored in operational election
Yeah,
databases?
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And so your analysis of the state, the management, storage, and nature of the encryption keys in the backup is valid for operational election databases?
Yes, it is.
Let me jump in on that point. So essentially what I'm hearing you say is the 4 databases that you analyzed and looked at very closely here, your opinion today is that is the same as the operating database that would be used live in an election. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir, it is.
And how are you able to say that?
Because these are relational databases, something that I was educated in, and they're built on a structure. And the most important thing is that structure cannot change because the way Dominion implements what's called stored procedures, that's the majority of their work. And those are in the database. So you cannot change a database table, for example. It would mess all the voting system up because then your configuration of your tabulators would have to change. There's all different components in the voting system. If it helps to answer, in any system when they create it, and this is whether it's ES&S or Dominion, but we'll talk specifically about Dominion, they create what's called an election project. And there's certain files that get created. And one of those files in the election project is the election database. And it's based off a template, a standard in the software development that they create from, and then it's customized in the table columns are given specific names that do not change, but the rows may change. For example, if there's a state election within Georgia, it will be specific information for those candidates, their party, and the way Georgia runs their election. Even if it's for anything else, if you're voting on funding, how to change state appropriations, whatever, that has to go public, anything like that, that's what changes within the database. The overall structure of the database and the procedures do not, only basically row data.
All right. And these 4 databases, they are a snapshot in time from when and what time period exactly?
Or from after the election, a couple of them are recounts.
Which election?
The 2020 elections.
2020 general November election?
Yes, sir.
Or is it also the runoff?
There are two that are recounts, so it would have been after the general election.
But bottom line, you're testifying that with confidence that the databases you saw relating to that election are still the ones in operation today, or are they still the ones being used and they weren't changed in any way in the open records disclosure process?
They're the exact same. They're a backup of that operational. If, for example, you have 2 options, sir, if you want to see that. You bring in an election management system, which has the database on it. We can quickly do a query. It takes no time at all. And you can see structurally that it's the same as what I examined. Or there would be engineering change orders or software update to say that they changed the database structure. And I can tell you for a fact that there's no such engineering change order for Dominion systems. I've looked at every one of them.
And as you would imagine, questions that the judge asks are of like the utmost importance in a trial, because it's really showing you where what his concerns are as far as measuring the legitimacy of a potential claim. And his point here is, how do you actually know that there's a problem here? And what he's essentially stated is, it's like the structure is pretty much, this is just the same system every single time, but the names are going to change. So, in this election, you'll have Jones versus Smith. In the next election, you'll have Harper versus Johnson. But everything else about the where they lay out, how everything is structured, everything else is preset. The same way a building is preset, and just the different people who are coming in and out of the building are changing. But the actual building itself is all staying the same, and it's the same today as it was in 2022 and in 2020. So,
thank you, Your Honor. So let me try a short version of the questions that the court was asking. How do you know that the way the encryption keys are set up in the backup database is the same as they are in the operational database?
Because the backup database is the operational database.
All right, sir.
It's just a snapshot.
Now, is there some way for you to tell if the backup election databases that you examined are authentic?
Yes, sir.
What is that method?
That's by what was provided from the counties and verifying the hash. And there's also SHA files that are part of the system when it's created. And I can compare those SHAs to what I create and see that it was unchanged.
All right. For the benefit of the court, what is a SHA file?
A SHA file is a hashing algorithm. It's basically the fingerprint. It's the identity of the file. In file integrity, you have the SHA's hashes. And there's MD5 hash. There's SHA-1, which is used by the voting systems. There's SHA-512 or 256 and SHA-512. The tool I use creates all those because I like to cover the bases because you never know what you might deal with.
So
SHA. It's an acronym. Sorry.
What does it stand for?
Oh, it's a secure hashing algorithm, if I'm not mistaken.
That would be the one instance I might have a leg up on him.
Yeah.
All right. So how does a hash value have any utility in authenticating a digital file?
It's the fingerprint. It's a one-way algorithm that it's a bit by bit binary operation that covers the file itself. In systems, and I've even read it in technical data packages of vendors, they recommend using a file integrity system. In the Department of Defense, we have them all the time. And an application does it. And on your critical portions of the operating system, you would create these SHA files, these hash files, and it's the fingerprint. So you know file integrity. And part of the application thing is it monitors the system. And it's constantly checking the hashes of the system. And so, for example, if a critical application on a server is changed or modified, that will flag it and you will get a warning in a console. And
So I'm trying to understand the concept. Are you comparing the hashes at different times? And how do you use them to figure it out?
when the file is generated, for example, in the public record request or when the system creates them, they create that SHA-1 file. And in the SHA file is the fingerprint of that file at the time that they exported it.
And so how, if you do, how do you use that to determine whether what you looked at was authentic?
You create the SHA yourself independently from what they provided you and you compare them.
And if they match, what does it tell you?
That tells you that you have the file at untouched. It's exactly as they gave it to you.
And if they don't match, what does that tell you?
That it's been manipulated.
And so you've said this, but I'm gonna ask it a different way. Is comparison of hash values an accepted method in the cybersecurity world for verifying the authenticity of a digital record?
Yes, it is.
In this case, were there hash values associated with the production by these 4 counties?
Yes, there were.
And did you carry out the process that you just described to compare hash values?
Yes, I compared the hash on the compressed files that I got and they matched. Then specifically on the databases and those, because I was going to restore them, I checked that SHA file.
And what did you find?
That it matched.
And therefore the what?
The databases are the operational databases.
All right, sir. Do you have copies of the file? Did I ask you to make flash drives of the files that you got?
Yes, sir, you did.
All right. I have those on flash drives. I actually do not have a flash drive for opposing counsel, but I can make that available to them by the end of the day. And what I would like to do is tender those. Well, I'll show them to the witness. If I may approach the witness, Your Honor. Mr. Parikh, can you identify these flash drives?
Yes, these are the 4 flash drives that I put the hash file that I created to do verification along with the compressed files. And then on the same exact media, I decompressed the files for your request. So if they wanted to look at the individual pieces of those compressed files along with the SHA values. So that's what's on here. They were brand new drives from Staples purchased. So there was open package. That was what was done. They were removed label and I've kept control of these the whole time.
All right. And you made those at my request?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I would like to assign those exhibit numbers 25, 26, 27, and 28. But they do not have exhibit labels on them, Your Honor. They do have the county label. And so if we could ask the court reporter to put an exhibit label on them at an appropriate moment.
All right, Mr. Tyson, so I know we could have your conditional thoughts on the admissibility of these so you can have a chance to actually look at them. But assuming they do contain what the witness says, I guess one I would wonder is, are these some kind of sensitive materials we have to handle in a specific way? And also if you have any other general objection.
So, Your Honor, I don't believe there are any sensitivities around that. They were produced already in open records requests and they're kind of out there already. And then I think aside from us getting a copy, then that's the only thing we would have, just make sure we have that, but no objection otherwise.
All right, so those will be conditionally admitted. You can re-raise it if you look at the copy and it doesn't turn out to be what you thought it was. So this would do with.
By the way, if you're wondering about the gravity of this, aside from is it feasible for someone to get this information? In the petition, they claim that that there have been so many of these open record requests and so much of this has become publicly available on the internet that the encryption key that it can be used to access the Georgian the Georgian voting system is so well known that they actually thought about making a mockery out of it by putting it on a T-shirt. That's how many people are aware of this encryption key. that is out there purportedly protecting the Georgian election. Now, if you want to feel a little bit better about it, if you trust the government and their claims, they claim that there's a new encryption key every day, and that old encryption key is just not the same encryption key anymore. That could be, I don't know, but that's a question of fact, which I expect that we're probably going to come across at some point during this hearing.
If you could provide that at some point, maybe over the lunch break.
Your Honor, could I get some water? Thank
You
you.
don't have to ask if it's your witness.
I didn't know that was the rule.
Well, it's a personal one.
Yeah, that was kind of my, but it depended on.
Also doesn't answer the problem, which is that supposedly, and one of the things that was raised in this petition is that when they create these encryption keys, they keep it in readable form, that anyone who has access to the system can just go in there and see what the encryption key is and use it, and it's fairly easy for anyone to access. So even if you're changing encryption keys, you're just going to write it on a new piece of paper tomorrow. The ideal way it's supposed to be stored under the FIPS system, which again, this is the system as far as methodology for protecting the system, that it's the password itself is supposed to be on a different modular device, it's supposed to be like elsewhere in like a different kind of vault, and it's supposed to be itself encrypted, so that in order to get access to the key, you have to have a different key to know to learn this key. It's sort of like a 2-key type of system, like in your old style nuclear sub type of thing. And that's not what they've been using. Instead, it's just like basically written out that anyone can just walk right up to the thing itself and see it, by way of analogy. When I lived there in Oklahoma, we used school Scantron ballots, paper backup the machine. I like that. Yeah, paper ballots always good. Also want to acknowledge this very generous super chat from you. And thank you so much, Marcelechka. And please do hit the like and subscribe. God bless you, brother. Thank you.
And what the court's pleasure was. So, Mr. Parikh, what, if anything, did you do to check on the encryption keys in these databases?
I did a general preliminary query across the database and to look for anything encryption key. It first identified the tables in the Georgia databases. Well, a couple of them were large, but still no more than a couple of minutes to do that. Once I identified those tables, I went to those tables. I just did the basic request that's already pre-programmed in the SQL database to look at the top 1,000 rows. And within,
Hold on.
Yeah.
What's the SQL database?
the SQL database, it is the relational database that's used by the Dominion system. And it's a relational database that uses SQL commands, the SQL commands, in order to execute views and search functions. It's a way to organize your data, and hopefully that's clear.
And SQL is pronounced SQL in the business.
Yes, yes, it is. Sorry for
And
that.
that's okay. And are SQL databases common in the world of computers?
Yes, they are.
And what does SQL stand for?
It's a querying language.
I got another one on you. Is it
Yes.
structured query language?
Yeah, structured query. Thank you.
Okay.
I couldn't remember structured.
All right. I will look dumb later on, Your Honor. Okay, so what did you, and you did the same approach for all four of these databases?
And other states' databases as well.
And so how did you retrieve, what did you do to retrieve or examine the encryption keys?
It's easily, you can export that query from the database itself and get all the keys, or you can copy and paste. It's fairly easy to get them out.
So there's some kind of command you enter and it shows you the encryption keys?
Right. That query of the top 1,000 rows for a specific table election event, that it's only one row, and it identifies the election, the time of the election, the county, what type of election, and then it has those keys.
And what is the state in which those keys are displayed?
They
Encrypted?
are, no, sir, they are unencrypted, plain text.
And plain text in your world means unencrypted.
Yes, sir.
That means you and I could read them.
In encryption, there's plain text and then there's encrypted text.
And as a cybersecurity professional, how would you characterize that method of storing encryption keys?
It's egregious in general terms. And I work in the cybersecurity realm, and I work with gentlemen who've got 1 year, 2 years experience, and then some who have as much as I do. And I just say, hey, what would you think about if the secret encryption key was stored in a database in plain text? And the very first thing you say, well, was the database encrypted? And I'm like, no. Well, how did you authenticate to the database? Well, I use operating system, and they're just like, their minds are blown.
So what does it mean for the security of the system that the encryption keys are stored in plain text in the election database?
There is, There is no security. For what little that you could claim as security is irrelevant. What's more important than the security is the integrity of the system. There is no integrity because you have to understand that these keys are vital to the security and the integrity of the system. This is how you validate that it's secure, that the data cannot be tampered with. That along with the logging, which doesn't exist, there's not appropriate logging on these systems to even track the actions done.
If a bad actor,
And logging is to basically keep track as to who's doing what to the system. So you wouldn't even know who the heck is. If someone goes in there, and anyone apparently can, anyone who's got access to the machine, if it's online, then anyone in the world, but that anyone go in there, get the encryption key, and just do whatever the hell they want. The point being, and this is the most poignant part of his testimony, obviously, that anyone can just come in there and do whatever the hell they want to Georgia's election.
got a hold of these encryption keys, what could they do?
They could change the configuration settings on the components. They could manipulate. They could create election data and encrypt it and make it seem legitimate when the system takes it in and evaluates it. You know, there's the saying, 1,000 ways to skin this cat. There's about 2,000 ways to skin this with those keys.
And would such changes or such actions be detectable on these systems?
No, they would not. And as in Dr. Haldeman's, no, they would not be detectable. And Dr. Haldeman in his report refers to this because when people ask, is there any evidence of hacking? Well, one, two, nothing against Dr. Haldeman, but he was not requested to do a forensic investigation of the system. So when he makes that statement, it's not exactly accurate. He is a security professional. I admire his capabilities, but he himself states when you hack these type of systems and the techniques he used would be undetectable. And I can verify that. When I did threat system stuff for the Department of Defense and we played bad guy, we would have to leave little safe files somewhere to prove because they would swear up and down that we were not there. We'd give them a directory, go look here, and it would say, guess who was here, or Waldo, or something silly like that.
Kilroy was here.
Yes.
All right. If you would, in the binder, turn to
I
tab
got Kilroy's
21,
everywhere.
and there's a document there marked Exhibit 21. Can you tell the court what that is?
It's a security analysis of Georgia's ImageCast X ballot marking devices.
That is
And it's the redacted version of Dr. Haldeman, which
I'm just going to pause and say I accidentally forgot to send her an invite, and that was the worst oversight, and it ruined the entire night. And I'm sorry, Megan.
for the record, its redactions were meaningless to me and some of the other technical people that I spoke with because for a tech person, it's not redacted.
in other words, you already knew.
The majority of regular people, yes.
All right. Now, have you prepared any demonstration of that would illustrate your testimony?
Yes, sir, I have.
And do you have your computer up there with you?
No, sir, it's back there. I didn't know whether I could bring it without permission, sir.
While you're doing that, Mr. McDougall, are you tendering Exhibit 21 for the record as well?
Actually, I think I would like to, but I don't have a witness to swear that it's, it's an exhibit in another case. I don't have Dr. Haldeman, so I'm not sure I can authenticate it. So, but I was going to let it be a document that the expert relied on. That was my intention, but if counsel would like to put it in, I'm certainly happy to have it in.
Any preference, Mr. Tyson?
And Your Honor, we would object to it coming in. I think it contains a lot of opinions. Dr. Haldeman was subject to several days of cross-examination on it at the curling trial.
All
I
right,
think that's fair. That was my thinking on it.
All right. Well, thanks for that clarification. Let me do a follow-up here as well. So the statement that, if a bad actor obtained keys, it would lead to these severe consequences. Just want to be clear. We're not talking about the keys necessarily that you had and as a result of the open records request. We're saying that as you believe they're currently stored, however they're out there now. Is that
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it's one of the demonstrations I will do. Will show you there are common passwords. There are passwords that have been used for an extremely long time. The same passwords I saw in the voting system test labs reside on the Georgia voting systems. And that's an egregious violation of password management, credential management. So.
All right. And before I forget it, I'll have a helpful note from Mr. Olson.
It sounds as if he's going to hack into the system right there in front of the judge, which would be awesome. I would love to see him do that. That's a powerful demonstration, right? I mean, the guy goes in there, he's like, yeah, let's do it. I'm going to hack him right now. That would be so friggin' cool.
Just as I was anticipating, is it X509 or X059?
X509.
Okay. I think earlier
Yeah,
you
that's
said
gonna be fire.
X059.
I apologize.
Okay. And is the X509 considered an encryption key?
it's considered a security certificate. It's a way of identifying and trusting a system. For example, if you go to Amazon or any of the web services, your computer or your phone, because your phone is nothing but a computer, it's going to connect with their server, and there has to be a
Seriously.
trust relationship built.
Destroy the
And
case.
that's done via the certificate. And with these certificates, a lot of times you really don't have to
No, I
authenticate
missed that.
with a username and password. It depends on how the system's built.
And have you made any findings about the X509 certificates across the election database?
For those of you who joined late, this is going on right now. I'm actually like 40 minutes behind, but this is a hearing that's going on this morning, which they're trying to basically say that the 2024 election system that Georgia has set up is completely unsecure, and that Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, has been neglectful in keeping watch over the Dominion systems, which are very easily hackable, and that they're looking for the court to mandate that they take steps in order to ensure that these glaring holes, like an encryption key that gives you access to the entire system and to do whatever you want without it being undetectable, that those holes be fixed promptly before the election, so we don't have to deal with hassles after the election.
That you have examined,
Yes, I have.
and what have you found?
They're the same.
And how would you characterize that in terms of cybersecurity?
And that's an egregious violation. And the fact that they're 10 years, they're allowed to exist for 10 years, means that they could easily be reused in election systems year after year if they're not changed or updated.
And so, as an example, on a local area network, what role does an X509 certificate play?
It would allow the system to trust the other system that has that certificate.
And so the system that is thereby trusted can do what with the other system?
It can communicate and access it, exchange communication, do whatever communications need to be done. And another thing about the certificates, because I've had them created, it's easy to do. They are not password protected. In other words, when I install the certificate, there's no password or PIN required to install them. And that's usually a security option that you do when you create a certificate that once you import. So that way, you know, it's an authorized user that installed the certificate on the system.
All right, Your Honor, at this point, I would like to move into the demonstrations, but Mr.
There we
Parikh is
go.
able to set up, and we've been at it for a little over 2 hours. So may I suggest humbly that we take a short break?
All right. Yeah, let's take 5 and we can back. We're gonna pick that up and go from there. Mr. Tyson, do you have any idea? I know we've still got some ground to cover here, but how long you're going to need for a cross?
I'm thinking I can do that in 45 minutes.
All right. We may end up wanting to break for lunch at the outset or maybe halfway through. Let's see where we get. All right. We'll be back in 5.
All right, so I'm going to fast forward through. As I said, we're 45 minutes behind.
And please.
I'm playing this at one. I'm playing this at 1 1/4 speed. I'm trying to catch up.
We can get.
Run it from his computer.
All right. We need to get him on Zoom then, right? Do we have you got a link?
Well, that was a question that I didn't know the answer to. He's got HDMI out.
It's
going
in,
into
it's showing
that,
here.
I don't.
It's on that machine, but he needs to be on Zoom to do it.
We haven't done that way
You want to
before.
log into Zoom?
If you think you're on it and you can try it, you can give it a shot. Otherwise, it creates a lot of audio issues because it starts echoing and
So I can forward him. the
Well,
Zoom link.
I'm just going to use video, sir,
it's just video.
with
Okay.
no audio.
We'll see if you can do it. I don't know.
Will that go out to the,
It should because
folks watching?
if he's able to share his screen there,
Well, he's got it up on that monitor.
yeah,
And so there might be some switch. One of y'all can feel up to get it.
because
on
that's
the rest of
going to be
the
the equipment. I don't know. Again, we've not done it that way before.
I can actually run the virtual machines
So maybe we
too.
should go with-
So whatever you want.
Yeah, let's do that. I would send them the Zoom link.
You
Have them
want me to
log
get on
on,
Zoom?
just because it's untested, so we don't really
Yes,
know
sir.
if that'll work.
Thank
And then we gotta, and then
Oh,
let
wait,
us.
I've got to get connected to the internet.
you. So it's Fulton County Public Wi-Fi.
You forward that email to
I did.
Yeah, okay.
And the reason I think that the state didn't want,
I'm trying to keep this.
the state tried keeping this hearing from
You
happening.
know, well, I'm,
Put up,
I'm going to mute them for a second. Because they're saying, legally he's done everything he has to do. He has to just make sure that before he certifies it, that they're capable of doing what they're supposed to. And he's not. And Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, is not obligated to monitor and make sure that everything is being done properly. And he's like, well, okay, I'm going to put on hold whether or not the statute requires him to do that. The reason that the Raffensperger doesn't want them to look at this is, I think when you actually see how easy it is to hack, the judge is gonna be like, don't tell me don't tell me that I need to let this go, because it's going to show them
Try to keep
that
this one
this
tight.
election that they're setting up is a friggin'
No,
joke.
there is no cleaning. You guys don't know that. Yeah, you put the system in a shredder. I'm just, especially if it's our guys. Again, I'm middle of the road.
Yes.
We'll zip along here till something looks like it's happening.
All right, can you try pulling it up? And you gotta mute your laptop. About another hour here. Let's see where we end up. Mr. McDougall.
All right, thank you. And before we play these demonstrations, I had a couple of additional questions for you. Do you have an opinion on whether the Dominion system that is currently in use in Georgia has the same vulnerabilities as these systems that you examined?
Yeah, yes, sir, I do.
What is that opinion?
That it is exactly the same. And the reason I say that is because I've reviewed every engineering change order that more than just Dominion, but every one that Dominion's ever submitted through the EAC, because the change of the database structure would require an engineering change order, because you basically have to change it across all the software versions that are distributed.
And if the system had been changed so as to store the encryption keys encrypted or in a cryptographic module, would that require a version number change?
Yes, it would, because you're structurally changing that. But as I do not work in a voting system test labs, I can't state that. Here's what I will tell you. The voting system test lab, from a technical perspective, keep things what's called de minimis, which means a minor change, so no version change is done. But
Minimal.
The fact that not even an engineering change order has been submitted, it's
the same.
to me evidence that the systems are still unencrypted.
And if there'd been a change made to encrypt the encryption keys or store them in a cryptographic module, is that the kind of change that would require submission of an engineering change order?
Absolutely.
Yes, it would.
And you have checked, and those are filed with the EAC?
Yes, and I want to state that while technically that will make it compliant with FIPS 140-2 and storage and management of the encryption keys, what it will not do is still mean that they cannot be obtained and decrypted, because the massive amounts of vulnerabilities on this system.
And the point, you're making a fair point here, Patricia. I think many of us may have seen how easy this is to do. It's different when you're trying to overturn an election that already happened versus trying to stop it before it does happen. Because judges are very scared to overturn the results of an election. But to have them take steps to try and secure the integrity of an election before it happens, they're far more likely to be amenable towards taking those steps to help keep it strong, rather than feel like they might be overturning the will of the public. And that's why it's a significant difference doing this in 2021 after the 2020 election. We're trying to overturn the 2020 election after the results have already popped up and gave us some sort of number that it's purporting to be legitimate, versus it's a stitch in time saving 9, basically. And that's the significant difference about doing this now.
The poor configuration of the database in itself, even if you encrypted that database, somebody mid-level could take over.
All right, sir. And now, did I ask you to prepare a demonstration of the topics of your testimony?
Yes, sir, you did.
And
The cowards.
did you record that in a video?
Yes, sir. I always record. I did. Well, I brought the larger laptop because I was going to pull up the virtual machines and do it live. But considering especially network connectivity and stuff for some of the password things, you always back up and record it. Ask anybody who's briefed at DEF CON or Black Hat.
All right. And Your Honor, I propose to have Mr. Parikh play the video recordings of his demonstrations and narrate them as he goes.
All right, is this also something you're tendering this demonstrative for the record?
Well, since it's a demonstrative, I wasn't planning to tender it, and I do not have the videos on a flash drive, but I can certainly have that delivered to everybody.
All right, any preference, Mr. Tyson?
I don't think, since it's just a demonstrative, I don't think it needs to come into the record. I think it's fine to play them and you can ask questions about them.
Demonstrative evidence versus demonstrative is not considered actual evidence. It's like it becomes part of the testimony, but it's not evidence that's separately submitted. Testimony is evidence. A document is evidence. A file could be evidence. They're going to be playing him here, actually, I guess, going through the process of hacking into the system. And the question is this recording going to become part of evidence or not? And it could be admitted as evidence. I'm not sure why he doesn't want to. I'll defer to Mr. McDougall that he knows what he's doing as to why he's not trying to get submitted as evidence. And the point being that he's going to testify about what he's showing you, and it's just demonstrative to display it, but it doesn't become part of the actual evidence of the record with respect to being something that becomes reviewed as the record. It's if anything becomes part of his testimony.
I'm fine with that.
All right. I know maybe not need to, but if there's maybe a preference for completeness of the record, since we'll be referring to things that may aren't reflected in the exhibits, or is this also going to be?
Well, these are illustrations of his testimony that reflect what he's talked about, and so they're demonstratives, 100% demonstrative evidence. So that's why I didn't prepare flash drives to tender.
All right. Well, if there's no request by the parties, then
I'll
all
put a
right.
flag in that, and I may bring them in because it will complete the record, and they are illustrative. All right, so Mr. Parikh, what is the first one that we're going to look at?
The first one deals with a common hash that's been known and still being used, one that I saw in the lab. And so before we start it, I want to explain in brief exactly what's going on. Let me downsize this. Well, it won't. All right, so I was trying to clear the screen so everyone can see. All right, so what we have here is on the left is the SQL database. Oh wait, it started to play. I'm sorry. All right, let's go back. So I want to explain everything. This is the SQL database. This is a DBS system of access. As you can see, it's appling database, and we're going to go down into a table, which is called app user.
And
On
this what you're showing is in the Microsoft SQL Studio.
Yes, sir. This is the tool. That's exactly what we're looking at. If you can see, it says Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. That's just how I access the database. And it is on the system, technically, when it shouldn't be. And then on the right is a website. It's called hashes.com. This is publicly available. You can go there and use it. So what we're going to do, I'll let it run here. We're going to go down to the app user table. We're going to select the top 100 rows, that same default query. Now, what I want to pull out, and I'm going to pause it right here, is these accounts, and you'll see, and I'll highlight over it with a mouse. There are certain accounts in here. If you notice, they have this 0x, which is irrelevant to the key. It's just this way of storage form, and they start 6166 alpha. Notice that those are all the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you those. I'm going to select one of them and copy, which basically removes out of the database. I'm going to paste it over here, remove that front portion because that's not part of the
All right, so let's
hash.
pause for just a second, okay? These passwords, are they encrypted or hashed, or what are they?
These are hashed passwords.
Which means what? Is it encrypted?
They have a one-way. Normally in an operating system, specifically Windows, when you put your password in, and it's all, Windows does not actually store the password, unlike these Dominion database systems. They actually store the hash. So when you put in the password, and it's a one-way algorithm, not supposed to be able to decrypt it if it's done appropriately. And even Microsoft Windows, and they protect these, and Linux, a different operating system, protects them in a different manner. There are different files, but those storage places for them are kept secure from a normal user. You don't normally see those unless you break into the system. And the reason that is because if you decrypt this hash, then you will see the password. And so when you log into the system, you log in with your credentials, it automatically creates a hash, and all it does is compare hashes. And there's still a hash and a whole bunch of other things I could get into on just this alone. But
so you've pasted the hash
right
for this
on an internet site. Yes.
Okay, carry on then.
And so the internet site, of course, requires a little bit of security so they know they're not getting a bot. And so we log in, and then as you can see, there's the hash, and at the end is the DVS Core 08 exclamation point.
Well, what is that?
That is a password that's been around for about, I do want to show one thing in perspective of this. Excuse me, need a little water. But this is a deficiency report from Wiley Labs from back in 2010. And this was reported, and as you can see in there, that DVS Core 08. And again, this report that I grabbed is from the EAC site, another publicly accessible site. So this password has been around. This report was from 2010. This is Dominion's. They're not the only vendor that hard-coded passwords, which from a software development thing is a critical sin.
This sucks because I actually use DVS Corp as my password for everything. DVS Corp 08 exclamation point. I'm feeling a little bit unnerved by this whole situation.
Anybody who's properly educated in computer science and software programming knows you do not do this. And so this was one of the major findings, and you can see that it's still in use.
All right, so going back to your,
Your Honor, if I could, just since we're now referring to a different document, I feel like that's out of demonstrative territory. I feel we should mark that at least. I think he's testified as to what it was, but
I think that's fair. I don't actually have it to mark or tender, but I can cure that, maybe not today because I'm not near a printer, but I will file it with I'll submit it with a notice of filing this evening.
All right. Well, you potentially could also just email it to our court reporter, and as long as we're looking at the same
Okay,
PDF, we can have it noted as, is that going to be what, Exhibit 26?
all right, sir.
Is Exhibit 26?
It would be, sorry, I'm going to go to my exhibit list.
Yeah.
And it's going to be 31.
31, okay. And so if this particular document is marked as Exhibit 31, I don't know if he's
We'll call it-
identified it enough for you, but is there an objection to this being tendered as Exhibit 31 later through email and digital version?
not to that method, Your Honor.
Would you
And I
like-
would just pose a relevance objection, but I know it's a low standard, so.
Okay,
yeah.
all right. So
I'm
over that
sorry.
objection, then,
So I can provide the full report title. If it's Wiley Deficiency Report. It's T57381 TAC 01.
all right. So Mr. McDougall, you're going to complete the record for us, and now we can proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Going back to your demo, can you get back to where you were?
Back in the DVS court or
Yes,
to the
yes.
desk? Okay.
All right, so towards the end, where the DVS Corp 08 exclamation point was visible. And so the result of the calculation performed on this public website on the hash reveals that the password is DVS Corp 08 exclamation point.
Yes, sir.
And that's been a hard-coded password on the system since at least 2010.
What's more importantly is
Wow. So basically, he was able to like figure out their password, which was the original password that came with the system when they pulled it out of the box. Unbelievable.
it's the password for these administrative accounts.
Are you aware of whether that password is the same on other systems
Yes, sir, it is.
and every system you've looked at?
Every system I've looked at, yes, sir.
And I believe you said that from a cybersecurity standpoint, how would you characterize that?
That's an egregious violation of the basic security principles. I have to state that. You could be year one cybersecurity and know that you don't do that.
And because it's an admin password, what does that mean from a security point of view?
There are so many things that can be done as an administrator. We would take up a lot of time for me to list them. You could basically do anything you wanted to.
All right, sir. All right, do you have another video? I assume we're finished with that one, right?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay.
And so the next one is going to be, and let me pause it here to give this set up. And this is done a little bit more professional. So it's got some graphics in it. But what we're doing here is, again, this is the SQL database. We're still in appling, I'm sorry, but we're going to run through every county. And what I'm going to show you is that even though the passwords are different and their encryption keys are different, because they're accessible, they still expose the password.
All right,
And
sir.
so on the right is another public website that does AES encryption and decryption. We're going to use the decryption portion. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run this query to find the keys. And this is simply it in the election event.
So I'm gonna stop there for a second. Now, we've talked in this case about you run a SQL query and you can retrieve the unencrypted keys.
Yes, sir.
Is that what's happening in the second pane?
Yes, that's
And
it.
so the query language, the form of the query, the computer command is what's up at the tip top of that pane.
Yes, sir.
And that's what tells the database what to show you.
Yes, sir.
All right. And it's, so
And-
just kind of walk through the query so we know what it's asking for.
Okay. So from an initial query of where the keys are located, I identified the tables. That's why you see it says from election event. That's the table that's shown. And in the other demo where I was going to do live, I would show you that table at first, but it's got a lot of extra things. You only want to see the keys. So this is that query. It pulls up all the pertinent keys. The one thing I want to stress, and for everybody to pay attention that watches this, is pay attention to the X059 certificate
Okay.
data.
Before you go
Right.
on, it says select name, and then it's got Rindell key, Rindell vector, X509 data, HMAC key.
Yes, those are the column names for those.
And so the effect of this query is to tell the system to go to the election event table and show you the Rindell key, the Rindell vector, the X509 data, and the HMAC key?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, carry on.
So we've got the key, and you can see they're partially blurred out. Now, as we cut and paste those in, we're going to go over. Now we're going to go for applicant, and we're going to query, and I'm going to pause it right here. Querying the tabulator user. So these are the passwords for all the different tabulators. And the thing that needs to be noted is they're all the same login, and notice they're all the same password. And again, they're encrypting passwords, which is just ridiculous in itself. But so we're going to, now that we have that, we're going to put that in the encrypted text.
All right, pause there, pause there. So to summarize where we are, you retrieved the Rindell key and vector
Yes, sir.
on the system from the election events table. You pasted those two values into the appropriate fields on the web page.
Yes, sir.
And now you've gone and selected a password that's the encrypted password from the user table.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then what do you do with the password on this web page?
This password is used for the administrator to log into the, oh, you want to see it execute?
Well, yeah. So just explain what's happening on this web page.
All right. So if you see down at the bottom, and again, I partially blurred it out. This is one of the passwords in plain text. So this is what the administrator, when he goes to log in, the PIN that he would put in to run that tabulator.
And so what this demonstrates is that you can retrieve the encryption keys, which are in plain text, and use them to decrypt an administrator's password.
Yes, sir.
All right. Carry on.
And so what we're going to do is now we're going to go back. We're going to pick Bibb County, do the same thing. We execute the query. We get that. And notice.
Hold on 1 second, Mr. Parikh. When you execute the query, the result is displayed below the query in that middle column.
Yes.
All right. And so it's a row with columns, a single row with columns.
Yes, sir.
And the columns are?
The columns are, the application calls from the column and per the row when it makes the software applications make queries to these databases. So it's got to identify what data to pull. And so the application will say, hey, I go to Rindell key because I need the encryption key for a certain administrator. And then basically it would write this stuff there. And it's got to verify the encryption keys be used for verification to decrypt the files once they're taken on. And so.
All right, sir. And this result that we see, those are the encryption keys in plain text. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
The decrypted at the very bottom. Of course, I blurred a little bit of it out.
But over in the middle column, the query result is showing you encryption keys, right?
Yes.
And they're in plain text.
Yes.
Okay. And that's how you're able to use them to decrypt the password.
Yes.
All right. Carry on.
And so we'll go back over. We'll execute the same query to find the tabulator users. And as we can see, a lot more tabulators here, but again, all the same password. And so while we're cutting and filling and pasting in, I want to pause it right here because this is important from an auditability standpoint. You've got the same password and the same account logging in with no traceability to who did what. It only takes one nefarious person, one insider, to do something, and then it's game over. He can do it on or he or she can do it on every component. This is very poor credential management. And
does that comply with the VVSG?
No, it does not.
All right.
The VVSG states to use best practices, and this is not a best practice. It's a worst practice. And we'll run through each and every county. Again, pay attention to the X05 certificates being the same across different counties. And you see, they're different keys. We get a different password in each county, but they're still all easily done.
All right, sir. And that's the end of that one.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Wow.
And have you got another one?
Yes, I've got one more. Hold on a minute. All right. Oh, wait. Selected the wrong one. All right. So what we've got here is I'm going to do a little bit of what I call key math, as I'm going to refer to it. This is the database. Appling again pulled up. I want to point out that, and I've already executed this other one, several people have, of just flipping the vote. And the reason I kept talking about the XO5 non-certificate, because I'm doing these things manually. This data can be collected. I can do these queries remotely. There's also a command line back in for studio management, which is on the system. So this stuff, once you've got connection on an internal network to the system, then this is easily done. This could be put on a USB drive. For example, USB drives are small. Our wireless devices for our Northrop Grumman corporate laptops, because where I work, we can't have them internal. They remove them because that's the only way to shut it off. Then you get a little, it's the same size as my mouse plug-in for the USB adapter. That's the wireless card. So that's how small. On that wireless card, I could also put, I can put the wireless card. I can put an application to make it think it's a keyboard, do the commands, all this in the background. I could put it in a phone cable card, in the power card, printer cord. That's how easy it is to put these scripts and execute them on the systems. And I want to bring that out because that's where we manipulated one digit for two candidates in that table, which would be least notable than this. But so what we're going to do, we're going to go down here. We're going to go to the stored procedures, which is where the majority of the work. What I want you to see is, and I did not open the other folder. This is just the stored procedures that are ran in the database for the application to work, a ton of them. But we're going to go to contest report results. We're going to execute the procedure. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm putting in a variable because the application would do this in order to make it execute. It would send this automatically. And so what we're doing is we're putting in the variable so we can run it. And as you see here, you see that Donald J. Trump got 6,526. Joe Biden got 1,779. Now I'm going to use snippet because I don't have that great a memory. We're going to cover this up. So we got it frozen. And we're going to downsize that. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to modify the actual stored procedure with just a few lines of code. So we're going to scroll down toward the bottom, all the way to the bottom right before it goes. And I'll show you when we get to it. I'm going to pause right there. Notice print 4 is add totals finished. So we're going to submit this right before all the totals are calculated. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to put a hard return in there, hitting enter. And then I've already got the instructions so to make this quicker and expedite. And so I'm copying these instructions and pasting them in there. And we're going to pause this right here. Notice that choice ID number 2 is getting 1,000 votes taken away, and choice ID number 1 is going to get 1,000. So I'm going to execute it. So now it's functionally stored, and then I'm going to go over here. We see how the totals are. Now we're going to execute this again, and we see that the totals have changed.
And how?
And right here we're comparing them. So from the screenshot, so you can see that they've changed. This can be done on any race, anything. And again, this is one of the 2,000 ways to skin this cat.
All right, sir. Would the encryption keys allow a bad actor to perform this exploit without detection?
Yes, sir.
And that's the third and last demo?
Yeah, yes, sir, it is. Unless you wanted to see the decryption of the DVD files, but that's a little bit more complicated. It's not complicated, it's easy to do, but we would be seeing it in the command line terminal, not the application itself. So I think for most people who aren't nerdy, they wouldn't. You can see the candidates' names, choices, and stuff like that. But
Yeah, I think that one is a little too nerdy for us. We went to law school for a reason.
Yeah.
Which most of us, it's because we're not good at math. Okay. Now, you've already talked a little bit about the DVS Corp 08 ! And the common passwords. Talk about that in terms of the VVSG and certification requirements and what kind of risks it creates.
We should object to that.
it's a significant amount of risk. Now, the VVSG states that you're supposed to use best practices for your authentication methods. And this is definitely not one of them. The worst thing is in my investigations of the database, I've seen that these usernames and passwords are the same in other states. So what that means, for example, someone from Arizona or Colorado could just wander in, or they could share that account information that has it. So by them being the same, not only just in the state of Georgia, but with other systems, it allows now the password to be known by anybody. So you get somebody in Colorado that says, hey, calls a friend in Georgia, boom, and it's over. Because they can access, they have the credentials. They don't even need to go through this. They're already going to be able to get on the component and then do whatever they needed to do.
So the password in Colorado is the same as Georgia?
Yes, sir. In my declaration of the Supreme Court, I actually highlight and show those.
In light of your testimony about how the system in Georgia does not comply with the requirements for certification, can you help the court understand how it got certified?
I can simply state what I've stated for a while, that the certification is simply more than a rubber stamping outfit. There's a reason I left in 2017, because I did this to keep technically proficient. I got to create different versions of virtual machines. I hacked in. Matter of fact, it's sort of like a rock star in some of the labs, because when I showed the guys the simplest things they'd never seen done before, I can tell you, I taught them about how to test tamper seals, because when I started, there weren't security seals on the voting systems. I showed them how to pick locks, because most of the locks on these tabulators and are incorporated on them are what's called wafer locks, which are easy to pick. I've shown, we actually using an alligator clip from things, showed them how to encrypt a secured storage compartment for poll books. Those are the things that I taught them. They have no security people. And again, I went to a professional staffing company, not a full-time employee. I was the only security person. I could not speak for SLI, but for Wiley Labs, which transitioned to NTS, which no longer, well, NTS still does the hardware portion for Pro V&V and Pro V&V. They have no security professionals in there. They barely comprehend software quality testing, let alone security testing.
As you understand the VVSG requirements, is it a continuing obligation that election systems used by the states meet those standards?
Yes, and you should be able to meet those very low standards.
Is there any reason that, well, why don't you tell us whether these Dominion systems can be brought into compliance?
And that's what this is really the key. Like, okay, you identify a problem. It's really important that you identify a solution that the court can compel Raffensperger to comply with between now and election day.
With the certification requirements for encryption keys?
They could be. I'm highly doubtful that it would be anytime soon. My suggestion is to have a mitigation plan in place and to make the appropriate engineering change orders and modify the logging and stuff and make it more transparent and more viewable. Allow these logs, and again, and I state this as a systems person in IT with over 20 years, system logs are not proprietary. They contain no confidential information within them. DOD even makes sure they have a standard that you can't even have the username or their password in the same log file. What you do find, and I'm just going to give you this example, when you put your password in as your username, we still see that in the log file. So then we have to look at another portion where we remind that user, please go change your password because you've just identified. And we're the only ones in security that see that. That's the extent as far as critical infrastructure in the DOD realm goes. Now, voting systems are been deemed critical infrastructure by Department of Homeland Security, but yet we don't make them maintain and follow the same critical infrastructure requirements. That's why I'm saying if the Dominion voting system can't meet these low standards, it's bad. So mitigation, you open up the logs, you allow transparency, you start doing the logging, and you put those steps in place to allow trust and confidence to come back into the elections and make it.
That sounds like at least a realistic solution. That for the 2024 election is like, all right, that anyone who comes in here and does anything is they're gonna have to leave footprints behind. So at least it can be reviewed to see whether that's a bare minimum.
More audible.
Are there any other transparency or disclosure measures that would help mitigate the risks that you've identified?
Yes, I've started a fairly detailed list, but that's pretty lengthy. And that would be something that I'm unsure. I believe the state election board, I know they do rules in Alabama. Our state election board approves the engineering change orders. And so to me, it would be the state request engineering change orders to make these small changes as far as logging audibility, and then on the county or the state's behalf to make sure that they're public records so that they can be checked by third party.
Would it mitigate any of the risks you've identified?
It would help you identify that the risk occurred and actually pursue and possibly identify the perpetrators or the cause of the incident.
So let me ask you this. If there was a requirement to produce promptly system logs, ballot images, and cast vote records, would that help?
Yes, sir, it would.
And would that change the voters' user experience on the machines in any way?
Not in any way, sir.
And those records already exist in the ordinary operation of the system?
Yes, sir. The only thing that I would add on that is to ensure that all ballot images are retained. A lot of them, to include my own state, do not retain them all. And to me, that is a digital chain of custody infraction. You've lost the chain of custody. You're taking something that started as a sheet of paper that went into a tabulator. It's transformed. A picture's taken. That picture is what's analyzed by the software. It's now in digital form. Every process of the digital form, which would include, once that image is taken, all the hash files there, all the identifying fingerprint signatures for each file to show that it's not manipulated, because it can be manipulated. And you track it all the way through, and all that stuff should be auditable. But to have those images, it should be required. I complained about this when they started allowing vendors the options and the states to turn the option off. Because two, you're evaluating the ballot differently for one voter than another.
Do you have any understanding of whether HAVA imposes any auditability requirements
Yes, sir, they do.
of the nature you're just describing?
Yes, sir. They require all system logs, and those are often not provided. The best way to actually get them sometimes is to grab an image of the file. So then you get the operating system logs and all that. Any forensic investigator would tell you this. You need all the possible data you can get. And this would include any components.
And producing the records that are already maintained by the system in the ordinary course, to your understanding, does that impose any significant burden on election officials?
No, it does not.
That's really important.
That's all the questions I have for you, Mr. Parikh. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Tyson, why don't we get started, see how much headway we can make?
Certainly.
That was really important as far as establishing.
Again, Mr. Parikh, good to see you.
It's very important to establish that there's a viable way of at least mitigating the problem and improving the currently disastrous system that's in place.
All right, so I wanted to kind of drill down a little bit. As I understood your testimony, you're offering opinions about the storage of these encryption keys and the compliance with both VVSG and HAVA. Is that fair to say?
Yes, but the main thing is it's about FIPS 140-2, which the VVSG require.
And so it's your conclusion, essentially, that the EAC improperly certified the Dominion equipment that's in use in Georgia, right?
They took what the voting system test labs gave them. What I would tell you is that system testing is incomplete and not to par. And whether it's considered, but I've got it from Wiley employees, to include the same employee who started Pro VNV, told me directly, we are just a
I'm gonna
tester.
stop you before you give hearsay testimony here.
Right.
That's what somebody else said.
Right.
So I can just be clear on this. You're not saying that the Dominion 5.5A system we use in Georgia is not EAC certified today, right? You're just saying it shouldn't be, right?
It got an EAC certification.
And that certification has not been revoked, correct?
That's correct. Also not followed is the EAC's election guidance, and that the component should be suspended until an investigation is done before it's utilized in an election.
So from your perspective, the EAC made a number of errors when it certified and did not revoke the Dominion 5.5A system, right?
So I have to explain this. And again, I'm not an attorney or a lawyer, but I did read the Help America Vote Act. And when I first saw voluntary voting systems guidelines, I said, well, why are standards and requirements voluntary? I'm from a DOD world. And so bear with me on this. So I'm used to requirements, you follow them. There's standards, you follow them. You get certified, you meet them all. The voluntary, I had to go back and reread the Constitution, because the federal government cannot dictate to the states how they run their elections. And that's why they're voluntary. But once the state says that it's their requirement to be federally certified, then it is a requirement. And so necessarily the way you're leading it would also, you would have to include the Secretary of State failed before I would say, but both those parties.
But an EAC failure is part of what you're talking about, right?
As well as, yes, sir, as well as the Secretary of State.
So let's talk a little bit about the EAC certification process, because I believe as you testified, the EAC certifies different voting systems, right?
Yes.
And the VVSG 1.0 standards are the standards that all current voting systems are certified to, right?
Are you specifically talking about Georgia?
I'm saying as a general matter, do you know?
No, there are actually other certification levels. Only less than a handful.
But VVSG 2.0 has only been adopted recently by the EAC. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in order to get certification by the EAC also certifies voting system test labs, right?
That is correct.
And ProVNV is a certified voting system test lab by the EAC, right?
Yes, they are.
And when the voting system test lab makes its report to the EAC and the EAC certifies, there is then a version of the software that is retained by both the voting system test lab and the EAC to say this is kind of the gold standard software, right?
The voting system test lab actually retains that.
And any change in the voting system that's more than a de minimis change that you reference requires a new certification, correct?
That's not necessarily true. There are varying parts of the changes, but most of them do, yes.
And that would include even, for example, installing an operating system software update that could require a new certification from the EAC, right?
Not necessarily true.
But it could, right?
It could.
And as I understood your testimony, there were two main areas that I understood you to say didn't comply, in your view, with the VBSG standards. One was the storage of encryption keys, and the other was the reuse of passwords. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you'd agree that on the Dominion system, encryption keys change with each election, correct?
As I demonstrated in the video, they were different between each of the counties within Georgia, but that's irrelevant to the point because they're unprotected.
So just so we're clear for the court, it's your understanding that at each election, each county has a unique encryption key. And then each of those encryption keys also changes, not just between counties, but also from election to election, right?
Speaking specifically about Georgia, but in some Dominion systems, that's not the case.
Look at how desperate they are to try and stop from being forced to keep log entries of people who might hack their system. It's astonishing just the level of corruption that our government has. It's like, how dare you try and push us into actually logging people who might come in here and F around with our system behind our backs. It's just like, this is just astonishing.
But in Georgia, it is, right?
Yes.
And so if someone had the 2020 encryption keys for Bibb County, Georgia, they would not then be able to access automatically the 2024 Cobb County election database. Is that right?
Well, if you taught the keys, there's a reason I talked about the X059 certificate being the same and good for 10 years. You don't have to have the keys necessarily to get to the system. Once I get to the system, I get the keys. For example, let's go off what you said. The 2020 keys are irrelevant. But to get them, you know where you got them from and how you acquired them. It would only take you a minute to get the new keys.
So let's talk about that piece, because you'd have to have physical access to the election management server to get that database.
Not necessarily, no, sir.
What non-physical access method could you utilize to obtain the election databases?
Would you like me to go over the 5 APTs for standalone air-gapped systems within the last 10 years, or the recent one where they can exfiltrate data from the sound, from the color, from your monitor?
Wow.
That's a way.
So it is your testimony that anyone without physical access to an election management server can access the database?
I did not say anyone, sir. So what I'm telling you is, if you rely on physical security, and by the way, I'm a physical security subject matter expert in the state of Alabama. I do know a thing about it. You are already gone. You cannot rely on physical security. As someone who's looked at some of the voting locations and run by counties, they're improper. They do not meet regular physical security standards, so they're not really secure facilities. These systems aren't stored. There are improper procedures on how the voting systems are stored.
Blowing them up.
And the auditability of when they start them up. So not anyone, but the majority of people who watch a few YouTube videos on Kali Linux or anything else and vulnerabilities and spend a couple hours of research. And again, we're talking about critical infrastructure for $1 trillion economy. It's fairly easy to do.
Now, we can agree that new election project files are created in Georgia for each new election, right?
Yes, you have to create a new project file that's specific to the election.
And part of that election project file is a new election database like the ones you reviewed, right?
No, sir. It's a new database. That's correct. The structure of the database and the composition of the database maintain the same. You have a template to where the data that you put in for the election through the EED, in Dominion's case, Election Event Designer, you put all your data into that. It does the configuration for that specific database. But the structure, the keys are stored in the same manner.
So just so we're clear, the structure of the database is the same because that's the Dominion system's method of using that database. But the information in that database would be different for each election. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. And it's still unencrypted and in the vulnerable database.
And that would involve different candidate names and different races that are in the database, right?
That's correct.
And it would involve different encryption keys as well, right?
But not necessarily. If you had a lazy county worker that wanted to use the same encryption key, just like we see they use the same passwords, that can be done.
Is it your understanding that county officials in Georgia build election project files?
Oh, Jesus.
No, sir. But that leads us down another path with the way the technical data packages, which I've reviewed plenty of, and the way these things are sold. I will tell you, and this may be irrelevant to Georgia, but my state of Alabama, we violate our state constitution by having it contracted out to third-party vendor. So what I would tell you is many counties let the vendors access it. And again, a vendor, a contractor, is an insider threat.
So you don't know how election project files are built for Georgia elections, right?
From what I've gathered, I'm not 100% on, but they are created by the vendor.
And you've never reviewed the process that Georgia uses to deliver election project files to county officials, right?
That process specifically, no.
And you've never reviewed the process that counties use to test voting equipment with logic and accuracy testing for Georgia elections. Is that correct?
Logic and accuracy testing are nothing but a semi-weak functional test of the system. They have absolutely no security relevance. What you would do prior to an LNA test each election, but you would do acceptance test or a trusted build test, which it only does file integrity and basically say, I got the software I'm supposed to have. And that's on the base system. But because you have an election project that's going to change a few things, so the limited hashes that they provide the counties to validate that, probably would be irrelevant. But to say that logic and accuracy, I refer to them as a dog and pony show. It's a warm and fuzzy.
But to be clear, you've not reviewed, even though you don't think they're valuable, you haven't reviewed Georgia's logic and accuracy processes, right?
You haven't.
No.
And you haven't reviewed the process that is used. Well, go back. In terms of the election project file, what you were looking at in the demonstrations you showed us was a post-election file, correct?
And you keep referring to it as a project file. You mean the database?
The database.
Election database. Yes.
Okay. And in order to manipulate what's in the database, you would need to get access to the system somehow, and then you would need to then get to the encryption keys. Is that correct?
That's correct. Easily done.
And then the individual who, or our hypothetical person we're talking about, would need to obtain access to each component of the system if the program file had already been distributed out to those components, right?
Not necessarily. Again, there are literally hundreds upon hundreds of attack vectors. Based on the data in the different counties I've examined in Georgia, I would say there's at least 6 different attacks that occurred, or techniques in the attacks. They did different counties and different methods. And again, that's because you know your target. Some counties are larger. You evaluate the process and procedures and you find where the vulnerabilities are.
This whole line of questioning is basically, maybe we won't be hacked. Maybe we won't be. You don't know that we will be hacked. You don't know that. You don't know we've been hacked. This is like, please stop punching us. Oh my God, this guy is this lawyer is flailing. Oh, the witness is just taking him on the woodshed.
And so my review of process and procedures, which I bet would be lacking like most other states where I have reviewed it, would be that, but it's irrelevant because the keys are in a highly vulnerable system with hundreds of vulnerabilities in an insecure database, unprotected.
And you mentioned several times the different attack vectors. You don't have any evidence that anyone has ever manipulated any of those attack vectors in a Georgia election, right?
Nobody
I will
cares.
reiterate what I said earlier that Dr. Halderman has reiterated. If you do some of these vulnerabilities, there will be no detection, especially in a system that does not upsize the logging information and constantly overrides the Windows logs. These are not best practices. You cannot audit or track down anything. Half the logs are not recorded. The application logs that are developed are improperly done anyway. They don't even go down to the millisecond, which is a best practice standard.
This would be great.
So to be clear, my question was a little more specific. You don't have any evidence that anyone has ever utilized these attack vectors in, excuse me,
Nobody
in an
could
actual
have
Georgia
evidence.
election, right?
There would be no evidence.
So you don't have any, right?
Oh, Jesus. You're so desperate, lawyer.
Of course, you're not going to have any. But if I attacked them, you still wouldn't have any.
And it's your testimony that even if the encryption keys were stored in an encrypted way, you would still consider the Dominion system to be vulnerable to attack, right?
Of course.
It would decrease the likelihood because you're going to knock out the low-level kitty scripters. That's why.
But I believe your testimony was that there would be a long list of things you would want to see changed in the Dominion system to make it more secure, right?
Yes.
It's a detailed list. And as I do when I provide, and I've provided it for counties
So
in
do
Arizona
nothing?
and in other places, because believe me, I think my folder count for different states is 26 currently. and people ask for help and advice. And so I do that. A lot of it is process procedure reviews. That's why I'll state LNA testing overall are a farce.
The line of questioning is so stupid. It's like, well, since we don't have state-of-the-art testing, we should just leave our jewelry on the front lawn. Idiot. What a stupid line of questioning.
And so you're the long list, it's dependent. I started writing one specifically for Georgia because I told them, I don't think the vendors will come through in time. But so you've got to we do it in the Department of Defense, they do it in Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, all the other programs and agencies I've supported. You have to have a mitigation plan. If you can't fix a vulnerability and remediate it on the spot, you've got to have a mitigation plan. Every agency in the Department of Defense has to report back up those plans and in a timely manner, and it depends on the criticality. What I would tell you is, it's based off what I saw the EAC in the states talk about between some governor's email and the remediation times. Oh, I think it came from CISA. Those remediation times were obnoxious. And then they try to keep it secret from the public on the mitigation of these vulnerabilities. And the timelines were, it's just ridiculous.
So I believe your testimony was that if there was a production of ballot images, logs, and cast vote records, that would help as this mitigation
Yes,
plan
it
you're
would.
talking about?
Yes.
But you'd agree that wouldn't address any of the undetectable hacking you've testified about, right?
It would help identify that something happened. There are different things that you can do. For example, you can just look at the election data as precincts come in and analyze from a mathematical standpoint. There's one, you cannot fight math. It can only do certain things. So when you, and I'm talking from a security incident response, a security operations center perspective. If I saw some of the anomalies like I've done in the different states in the elections, you say that, you immediately notify the CERT team, image that server, capture that network traffic. We have to analyze because there's an anomaly there and you have to investigate. There's been no investigations of any detail. And even if you do, the way the systems are built and configured, they do not log it. And so it's one thing to try to find evidence, and you keep going on evidence, but of it there's hack. And I, Dr. Haldeman, have said there would be no evidence. But the thing is about the trust of the system. Would you put your money in something that you couldn't guarantee wasn't hacked?
Nice.
It's crazy to base it on that and trust a system that has no integrity.
Is it your testimony that Georgia voters cannot trust the outcome of the 2024 election if the system is used as it's currently configured?
100%.
Yes.
What a stupid
And in
question.
terms of the various pieces you said of things you would analyze and look at, you'd agree that's a kind of a policy decision of where you're going to put resources to investigate. Is that right?
I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Sure. So we were talking earlier about the cast vote records, the ballot images, and the log files that you believe should be made available. You'd agree that how many resources to devote to those types of investigations is a policy question, right?
It can be considered a policy question. But again, these voting systems are paid for by tax money, which is the voters. And so to make something publicly available, and if you look at HAVA, Title III, Section 301, and the requirements of Section A, a voter not only has to verify and independently check his ballot cast, that voter has the same right to ensure that his ballot was done that. And
Brad Raffensperger can decide to have a policy that we're going to have completely unsecure elections. Wouldn't you agree with that?
varies from state. I've read a lot of state constitutions, and so that varies. But that's something that should be done anyway, to make them publicly think. Now, if you're trying to go off to like the way Fulton County said about it would take them 50,000 hours to gather data, I could pull 24 database people in here that could show them how to do it in an hour. And so resources to access public records and to extract these logs and back them up and put them somewhere secure for people to be able to request them is not that labor intensive.
So let's talk a little bit about the data and the pieces here. When did you download these Georgia databases that you began your review on?
Oh, I don't know the exact date. It was a while back prior to our submission for the Lake Fincham case to the Supreme Court.
And that's the Arizona case you were referring to?
Yes.
So at least several months ago?
Yes.
Do you recall when you first started preparing your declaration for this case?
It was somewhere in between my trips to the state. I've come here several times to talk to the state election board on behalf of some of the complaints there, and I've been asked to speak, and I've been asked technical questions.
So
And I will give Georgia kudos. At least your state election board is listening to the voters and hearing things, unlike my home state.
So it'd be safe to say probably several months is when you started on the declaration as well?
I would say probably after late July, I think.
Do you recall when you first identified the encryption keys being stored in an unencrypted way in Georgia?
In Georgia was when I got those
Against
databases. I saw
Georgia
the same exact
Secretary of
thing
State.
that I saw in Arizona and Colorado.
And had you reviewed Dr. Halderman's report from the Curling case before you downloaded those databases?
When was that released?
I believe it was the summer of 23 agree was the
Yes,
testimony.
the most definitely, believe me, people, I got several copies of it. People asked me to review it and give my opinion.
And you're aware Dr. Halderman discusses this encryption key issue in his report, right?
Yes, it does.
So was that when you first learned about the encryption key issue, not when you looked at the databases?
I knew there were issues with keys from other reports, but then again, knowing this vulnerability and the amount of stuff that was going on in different states, it didn't register until I really focused in on the Kerry Lake case and examining that. And when Arizona wanted their database examined.
In the Kerry Lake case that you referenced, the court didn't order any relief in that case, right?
No, they did not.
Sir, I know we're about 12:30. I'm about to shift to a different area, maybe a good break point.
This is a good stopping point. And yes, let's take a lunch recess. We'll make it somewhat abbreviated and hopefully folks packed. Yes, sir.
Are you going to ask me any questions to where I need my demo? Can I shut my laptop down and put it away?
That is a great question. I don't believe I will. I have some questions generally about them, but I don't think we'll need to look at them to answer
Okay.
those questions.
So feel free to disconnect.
Thank you, sir.
Let's take a 45 minutes. So let's be back ready to go at 1:15.
Oh,
I'll
God.
instruct the witness that while you can discuss the matter with counsel, not to discuss with any witnesses
Yeah.
in this case that may testify here. For the parties here, if anyone wants to assemble in the jury room over the lunch break, they can do so. We also have another side room that might only hold like 4. So if someone wants to take that, I'll let y'all arm wrestle over it. And we'll be back at 1:15. All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Ron.
Damn it. I didn't want such a short
I
lunch
do
break.
realize I'll be under oath when I come back.
That's right.
I was really hoping he would say he's going to be back here at 2:00. All right. But I am going to set up another stream. I know. It's just like, it's what I have to do. So I am going to be setting up another stream. I'm going to be shutting down now and reopening back up at 1:15. I might start 15 minutes late. I'm probably going to set up for 1:30 because I sort of need to take a half-hour break. So I will be back here at 1:30. We'll catch up over we'll be like 15 minutes behind. That's okay. And I will see you all back then. Thank you, those of you who gifted memberships and stuff and gave comments and things, and were very generous with your super chats. This guy is fire. He's amazing. Oh my God. He's just ripping, he's destroying. You rarely see an attorney just get so wrangled by the witness, where it's like the witness is like, no, you're being kind of stupid. This is off to a really, really strong start. It's very important that he has some sort of recommendations that seem practical and logical to help at least be able to ensure that they're easily tracked if in fact something is manipulated. That's a really, really important thing, assuming that those remediation steps are implemented properly, which I have concerns about. But at least this is a step going in the right direction, hopefully. Well, obviously, it all depends on the outcome of this case. I will be back here at 1:30. Look for the new stream. You'll find a link to that over Locals, which is goodlogic.locals.com, goodlogic.locals.com. I'll be back up here on Rumble, on YouTube, X, and we'll continue up at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, which is in 35 minutes or so. Look for those links. They should be coming up in the next 10 minutes or so. Till then, I'm Joe Neerman. I'll catch you all soon. Godspeed.